Chapter 19. Dragon Fighting for Prose. There was chaos in the great hall. Dumbledore repeated Harry's name, and at his friend's urging, he went into the same room where the other champions had gone, because there really was no other choice. Somehow, despite not entering, despite being magically underage, despite hoping for another peaceful year, he had been named the fourth champion of the Triwizard Tournament. He remembered what Trelawney had said in her prophecy this time. The Dark Lord shall rise from the grave, greater and more terrible than ever before. Was this the beginning of the chain of events that would lead to this? Or a red herring, a distraction for Dumbledore and Wizarding Britain while Voldemort made moves elsewhere? When Harry entered the room where the champions were to meet, he braced himself for what was coming. The Triwizard Tournament had been built up as a chance for ultimate fame and glory, and the disruption caused by his surprise entry was going to make a lot of Peeplevery angry. "What is it?" Fleur de Lacquer asked. "Do they want us back in the hall?" "No," Harry said. "Things are about to get very ugly, and I promise you this isn't my fault." None of the champions could say anything more, for the adults came rushing in. "Extraordinary," Ludo Bagman exclaimed. "Absolute extraordinary. May I introduce, incredible though it may seem, the fourth Triwizard champion." The room was silent for a moment, as the three proper champions surveyed Harry. "Very funny joke, Mr. Bagman," Fleur said with a smile. "Unfortunately not," Harry responded. "Harry's name just came out of the goblet of fire," Bagman explained. "But evidently there has been a mistake," Fleur countered. "He cannot compete. He is too young." "I don't want to compete," Harry added, though it didn't seem like anyone was actually paying attention to what he was saying, seeing as Bagman basically talked over him. "As his name's come out of the goblet," he was saying, "it's down in the rules, he's obliged." And then the headmasters arrived and proceeded to start complaining as if they were the ones who had been wronged, and not Harry, who had just been entered into a death tournament against his will. "It is most unjust," Madame Maxime was exclaiming. "I agree," Harry spoke loudly, trying to be heard over the din of the arguing school heads. "I don't want to compete. I didn't enter my name, and if there's a way for me to get out of this, I'll take it." "Why wouldn't you want to compete?" Fleur asked. "We have all been hoping to be chosen for weeks and weeks, the honor for our schools, 1,000 galleons in prize money." "6 words, mademoiselle, cancelled due to the death toll." "Potter has it right, Professor Moody. The tasks were designed for students 3 years older than him. To be a champion is a chance that many would die for, and maybe someone is hoping he will." A tense silence followed these words. "What a thing to say," Bagman said anxiously. "We all know that Mad-Eye Moody considers the morning a waste if he hasn't discovered 6 murder plots by lunchtime," Karkaroff said. "And now he's teaching his students to fear assassination, too." "More likely," Professor Snape drawled with a sneer. "Potter has acted like he's above the rules from the moment he started Hogwarts." Harry scowled at his head of house. He and his friends had been model students in this loop, at least as far as the teachers were concerned. "Name one time I've misbehaved, sir," he said firmly, but remaining politely. Snape only sneered again. "You're as arrogant as your father, Potter," he snarled, "and as malicious as your godfather." "Am I, though?" Harry shot back. "I'm not a prankster like them, that would be the Weasley twins. And I'm not a bully, either, that would be Draco Malfoy and his gang. You've treated me with scorn for 3 years, and I've responded with nothing but politeness. I think my mother, for one, would be very disappointed in you." In all the years since he'd first learned of Snape's friendship with his mother, that Snape was willing to spy and to die in her name, Harry had never once used it. Since Sirius had briefly mentioned their friendship in this loop, Harry was able to use it to lash out at the professor, who even now was pushing his vendetta against him. The potions master reared back, as if slapped before leaning toward Harry and snarling. "You brat," he growled, seeming as if he was building up to a yell. Harry instinctively shrunk back at the man whose rage reminded him of Uncle Vernon's. "Enough," Dumbledore boomed. "From both of you. Harry, did you put your name in the goblet of fire?" "No, I didn't, sir," Harry said, trying to remain calm as he met the Hogwarts headmaster's eyes. "And did you ask someone to put it in for you?" "No, sir," Harry denied again. Dumbledore nodded in satisfaction at his answers, but the others weren't so convinced. "But of course he is lying," Maxim cried out, and Snape smiled in satisfaction. "Why is that an of course?" Harry mused aloud, though nobody paid any attention to him. Eventually, Bagman put a stop to arguing. "Crouch," he addressed his fellow department head. "You know the rules backward and forward. What is your decision?" "I'm afraid," Crouch said, "that the rules are clear. Those whose names come out of the goblet of fire are bound to compete in the tournament." "Then I insist on resubmitting the names of the rest of my students," Karkaroff said. "You will set up the goblet of fire again until every school has 2 champions." "But Karkaroff," said Bagman, "it doesn't work like that. The goblet of fire's gone out, and it won't light again until the start of the next tournament, in which Durmstrang will most certainly not competing," Karkaroff yelled. "I have half a mind to leave now." "Empty threat, Karkaroff. You can't leave your champion now. He's got to compete. They've all got to compete. Binding magical contract." "Oh shit," Harry swore loudly. "Language, Mr. Potter," Professor McGonagall reflexively chastised him. "I think you'll forgive me," Harry said dismissively. "Because Moody's wrong, this isn't an attempt to kill me. No, this is so much worse. My magic is underage, which means that a binding magical contract could damage or destroy it, even if Ida compete." "What do you mean?" Cedric Diggory asked, a little concerned. "Okay," Harry said, as he drew his wand for a moment before pausing and stowing it back away. "Basics of core theory. A wizard's core at birth is like a gas, extremely volatile and uncontrollable, which is why we have accidental magic. Once we start magical training, it becomes more like a liquid, a ball of water, say. It's what allows us to learn new kinds of magic more easily as children, and to grow our stores of magical power through practice. And then, when we hit 17 and become of age, our core becomes solid, like a ball of ice. Sturdier and more resilient, but also far less adaptable. Adults can't really learn new magic, at least not as easily as children can. A magical binding, then, is kind of like a cage or chains around your core, which will nudge you as needed to fulfill the conditions of the binding. And if you flat out break the conditions of the binding, will forcibly tear your magical core out of you. An event which, while traumatic, is in theory survivable unless the binding is an unbreakable vow. For a solid adult core, this is fine. For a liquid underage core, however, even the nudges could potentially cause permanent damage to my magic. And to make matters worse, every spell I cast while under the binding will cause my core to expand a little, pushing against the chains and potentially causing permanent damage. So not only do I have to follow the contract I've been forced into, to the letter, or risk permanent magical damage, I'll have to minimize my use of magic for the entire remainder of the school year. The room was silent as Harry completed his explanation. At least giving up 1 year of magical progress wasn't as bad for him because of the loop. On the other hand, any magical damage he got during this would probably not be reverted when this loop came to an end. When he finished his mini-lecture, everyone in the room looked a bit nauseated by the idea of someone's magic getting permanent damage. 20 points to Slytherin, Dumbledore said quietly into the silence, for a thorough and unfortunately accurate summary of how magical bindings affect underage cores. "Well," Bagman said into the conversational void in an attempt to lighten the mood, "we need to give you instructions for the tournament. There will be 5 tasks. The first task will take place on 24 November. We will not tell you what it is. Courage in the face of the unknown is an important quality in a wizard, very important." Crouch took up a litany of the additional rules. The champions are not permitted to ask for or accept help of any kind from their teachers to complete the tasks in the tournament. The champions will face the first challenge, armed only with their wands. They will receive information about the second task when the first is over. Owing to the demanding and time-consuming nature of the tournament, the champions are exempted from end-of-year tests. After the teachers dismissed them, Harry mostly managed to convince Diggory that he hadn't entered himself. The knowledge of the effects of the magical binding certainly helped with that. When he got back to the Slytherin common room, the house was split between celebrating getting a champion of their own and hating on him for being a cheater. He only really cared, however, about his friends. "It's a binding magical contract," he informed them, causing a round of swearing from all of them, even Hermione. "Ron, take my wand. I don't want to use it on reflex and risk damage." "In future loops," Hermione said, "if we can't figure out who got you into this, there's a spell I read about that can counter the deleterious effects of a magical binding, but only if cast beforehand." "Little use now, though," Neville muttered. "We'll have to get you through the tournament with as little magic used as possible. I trust you all to have my back." The next morning, Harry approached the head table to speak with Dumbledore. "Headmaster," he said, "could I have a minute of your time, please?" "He's a very busy man, Potter," Snape said, "and he doesn't have the time to cater to your every whim." Harry pressed his fingers to his forehead in response to the man's snide interruption. Could the man be any more of a nuisance and a hindrance to him? Dumbledore shut his potion-ear and spy an inscrutable look before turning to Harry. "Of course, Mr. Potter." The eccentrically dressed wizard led Harry to a side room, the same side room, in fact, where the champions had met the previous night. "You know that I cannot help you in the tournament, Harry." "I don't need any help there, sir," Harry assured him. "Just two things. First, a copy of the contract that I'm bound to follow. And second, a written note that I don't have to use my wand in classes for the rest of the year. In fact, I don't plan on using my magic at all outside of the tasks." "But my boy, surely you'll need to prepare for the tasks, to practice spells, or there is a real chance you'll be injured or die." "I'm not in as bad a position as you think, sir. My friends and I have read ahead a bit. Still, I can't risk damaging my magic." "Very well," Dumbledore said, with a grave nod. He conjured a quill and parchment and wrote a short note before handing it to Harry. "I'll have Professor Snape give you a copy of the contract this evening." "Anyone else, sir? Please. I'm not sure that he wouldn't make minor edits to the contract just to see me break it." "Professor Snape has my full trust, Harry. But with all due respect, sir, he slandered me last night in a room full of foreign dignitaries, my fellow champions, and ministry officials when I needed the support of my head of house. How am I supposed to trust him?" Dumbledore didn't have an answer for him. During the month of November, Harry learned how to manage without his wand. His friends played 24/7 bodyguard for him, ensuring that Draco Malfoy couldn't take advantage of his defenseless state. Of course, the entitled blonde tried to hex him anyway. The Gryffindors, Hufflepuffs, and Ravenclaws were also antagonistic to Harry, though their attacks were more often verbal than magical. Sirius sent a howler to Dumbledore when he found out about what had happened, but while Harry admired his sheer chutzpah for sending Dumbledore a howler, it ultimately amounted to nothing in terms of actual changes to Harry's situation. Ron ran Harry through an intensive physical training regimen that was a combination of Oliver Wood's training schedule and a book on Muggle boot camp with an extra 10% bonus just for fun. Neville added in lessons on sword fighting. Hermione spent a lot of the month of November brewing muscle-restoring potions for Harry in order to help him improve his strength even more, and the rest of the month researching every Triwizard Tournament task since its inception with Luna's help. The girls concluded that the first task was likely going to be against a dangerous magical creature. Depending on which one, Harry might or might not have to use his wand. "The question is," Neville said, "should we just end this now? Have one of us throw ourselves off the astronomy tower or something." Ron shook his head. "We need the information on what's going to happen in the tournament sooner or later, not to mention we need to try to figure out who entered Harry's name. Harry knows the risks." "He's right," Harry said. "I do know better than to risk damaging my magic, even if it means dying in one of the tasks." "Besides," Hermione said worriedly, "I'm not entirely sure that if Harry goes back in time before the binding is released, it won't cause any damage." Harry shuddered. "Then I'll do my best to survive this tournament with as little magic as possible." The five friends made a list of everything that Harry could and couldn't do. Anything Muggle was okay, of course, as were some potions and enchanted objects that even a Muggle or Squib could handle. A broomstick, however, required some of the user's magic to function, as did powerful potions like Polyjuice. And of course, spellcasting was right out. 3 nights before the first task, Ron received a note from his brother, Charlie, which informed him that he had arrived in Britain for work. It hardly took a genius to deduce what the first task was going to be. Harry was going to have to fight a dragon. He was doomed. Harry wasn't quite as doomed as he thought. Hermione, Ron, Neville, and Luna had come up with a good plan, or at least as good a plan as Harry could expect. He'd also sent Neville to pass along a message to Cedric, telling him about the dragons. A Slytherin he might have been in this loop, but he refused to see an innocent boy face a dragon without at least giving him a bit of warning. In the champion's tent, Harry received his task to retrieve a golden egg from the nest and drew his dragon. He got to go last, but was assigned the most vicious dragon of the lot. And he had only his wand and his robes, which was wonderful, just wonderful. Harry wondered why he'd suddenly become so sarcastic, even to himself. He didn't really pay attention to what was happening while Crumb, Diggory, and Delacour faced their dragons. It seemed like they all managed to at least succeed. Now, Harry would have to do the same, but with a severe handicap. When his name was called, Harry drew his wand and stepped out into the rock-strewn arena. Crouching behind a large boulder, he cast only 2 spells, the first 2 spells, in fact, that he had cast since Halloween. The first, Jealous Incendio, was the basic flame-freezing charm learned in 4th-year charms. The second, Mutatio Gladius, transformed a nearby stone into a sharp steel sword, identical to the one that Neville had been using to train him for the past month. With each spell, Harry felt a minute but distinct twinge inside his center, so he put his wand back in his pocket. "Is he going to fight the dragon with a sword?" he heard Bagman ask, and yes, he was, but that wasn't going to be his only weapon. Harry took off his outer robe, revealing his t-shirt and pants beneath it. Using the sword as a cutting tool, Harry cut a makeshift sling out of the fabric. A sling and stones had been used by David to fell the legendary Goliath, and so would it be used today. He'd spent a few weeks practicing his skill and aim in the weapon ever since Hermione had come up with the idea. After completing the sling, Harry gathered some nearby round pebbles and tossed them in his hand to weigh them and to determine which ones would be best for his purposes. The dragon had not made any moves toward him yet, seeing as he had remained behind a boulder and very far away from the nest. But when Harry stood up with his sword in his right hand and his sling in his left, with the ammunition he'd collected in his pocket. Angling toward the left, Harry began to shoot pebbles at the dragon's eyes, causing it to become agitated. When it opened its mouth to breathe flame, Harry slung another pebble into its throat. Nevertheless, it breathed out a huge gout of fire, which Harry avoided by diving and rolling to his left, darting in to score a gash on the dragon's side with his blade before retreating. The dragon now stood off its nest to attack Harry, so he did the unthinkable, sprinting straight toward the dragon, rolling under the swing of its tail while deflecting one of its spikes with his sword, and pocketing his sling so he could grab the golden egg with his left arm. Turning back toward the arena's entrance, he began to sprint as fast as he could, but the dragon was faster. Harry had to dive to his right to avoid another shot of dragon fire, using a boulder as cover. The boulder began to overheat rapidly, but it lasted long enough for Harry to recover his footing and dart even closer to the exit. Setting down his sword momentarily and grabbing again his sling, he shot a pebble into the dragon's left eye and then its right, which disoriented it enough for him to sprint the rest of the way to the champion's tent. Chapter 20. Dancing Through Life. When it came to scoring Harry, the judges' opinions were split. On the one hand, Harry had been ballsy enough to face a nesting mother dragon of one of the world's most vicious species with only a transfigured sword, a makeshift sling, and a simple flame-freezing charm. And he had done it. On the other hand, he had not demonstrated any great ability in magic, only a simple inanimate transfiguration and a fourth-year charm. Ultimately, he'd scored a 29 out of 50 possible points. Not the best score of the lot, but Harry considered not dying and not severely damaging his magic to be a victory. Ludo Bagman informed the champions that their golden eggs could be opened and contained a clue to the next task, which would take place in exactly 2 months on 24 January. During the party where about 60% of Slytherin celebrated Harry not dying against the dragon, they asked him to open the egg, and then quickly asked him to close it, seeing as the noise it emitted was the most god-awful high-pitched screech that any of them had ever been forced to hear. At first, Harry thought that it would take a while to solve the clue. However, Luna recognized it first thing as Mermish, a language that could be easily understood underwater. Hermione transfigured a large basin that Ron and Neville filled with spell-conjured water. All of them took their turns listening to the clue, which took the form of a song. "Well," Harry said, after they'd finished writing down the song's lyrics, "that was kind of cryptic." "Come seek us where our voices sound," Luna said. "The task will be underwater." "I can't swim," Harry said. "The Dursleys certainly never bothered to teach me, especially since Dudley couldn't be bothered to learn himself." "At first, I thought we could just use gillyweed," Neville said. "It's a rare plant that would effectively let you turn into a merman, Harry." "But it sounds like a powerful enough transformation it would need to draw on Harry's own magic," Hermione said, and Neville nodded in agreement. "Do some research on it to double-check, but we need another solution." "Will do," said Neville. "What about an enchanted object?" Ron suggested. "The problem would be coming up with one that doesn't use my own magic," Harry said. "I know from our research that only the simplest of magical objects can work entirely without a wizard's magic." "There are 3 things to worry about," said Neville. "Breathing underwater, moving underwater, and staying warm. The first and the last we could do easily enough, and Harry will have to learn how to swim." "Where could I do that, though?" Harry asked. "I mean, Hogwarts doesn't have a pool, and I'd rather not learn in the Black Lake, which, now that I think about it, is probably where I'm going to have to be swimming. In January, in a lake that will likely be frozen over." "Well, we could ask Darby if he knows of a place where you could learn to swim," Hermione suggested. "Hogwarts has a lot of secrets, and the elves know most of them." Harry called his elven friend and asked him if there was a place where Harry could swim in Hogwarts, and that was how they found out about the Room of Requirement. The first time that she entered the Room of Requirement, Luna reflexively shuddered. "What's wrong?" Harry asked, though he already suspected the answer. "There's something very, very wrong in this room," Luna whispered nervously. "Wrong like the diary, like the locket?" Hermione asked, and Luna nodded, confirming what they were all thinking. "But Darby said that this room could be anything we want it to be," Ron said. "So it might not be visible to us. It might be in some other version of the room." "Swimming can wait," Harry declared. "We need to deal with this as soon as possible." The 5 students exited the Room of Requirement, the door closing and vanishing behind them. "You need to be the one to ask for it, I think, Luna," Neville said. "You need to find whatever is causing your bad feeling." Luna nodded in agreement. "I need to find what feels wrong. I need the version of the room that stores the corrupted object. I need to gain access to the Horcrux." On her third pass, the door to the room of requirement opened, revealing a cavernous hall full of tall shelves. "I'll lead the way," Luna said quietly as she walked into the room, with Neville and Ron following her. Hermione, however, didn't move. "You can't use your magic, so you shouldn't even be going in there," she told him, "and I'm going to stay out here to guard you." "Got it," Harry said, even though he wasn't happy about being sidelined. He cursed once more whoever had decided to put him into a binding magical contract. They stood in undisturbed silence as they waited for their friends to come back. 15 minutes later, Luna came out of the room of requirement, holding a thin silver crown in her hands, although she wasn't touching directly, but through a thick cloth. Ron and Neville were behind her, but they maintained a significant distance from the Horcrux. "This is Ravenclaw's lost diadem," the Ravenclaw girl explained. "It's said to make the wearer wiser. Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure." "And Voldemort defiled it," she spat. "We have to destroy it." "We will," Harry assured her. "Right now. To the chamber it is." Thankfully, speaking the language of the snakes didn't actively use Harry's magic, so he was able to lead his friends down to the chamber, where the corpse of the basilisk remained, somewhat rotting, but still nearly as intact as the day they'd slain it. The fangs in particular retained their full potency. With Harry standing back and Ron guarding him, Luna picked up a fang and, with a mournful look, jammed it into the lost diadem, destroying it and the Horcrux inside of it forever. Professor McGonagall had the duty of informing her students of the upcoming Yule Ball, a traditional part of the Triwizard Tournament. She also was the one to tell Harry that he was not merely invited to the ball, but required to attend with a partner, and to open the ball with a formal dance. Harry didn't know how to dance. There were only two girls that Harry seriously considered asking to the ball, Hermione and Luna. After some deliberation, he decided to ask out Luna, since he wanted to ensure that his third-year friend would get to attend the ball. The Ravenclaw girl accepted and promised to help him learn how to dance. Harry thought that Hermione would end up going with either Ron or Neville, simply because those were the two boys apart from Harry to whom she was closest. However, neither of his male friends asked her out soon enough, leading to her getting asked to the ball by Victor Crumb of all people. Ron was quite jealous, though of whom Harry couldn't say, and ended up securing one of their housemates, Tracy Davis, as his date. Neville asked out Ginny, and only received mild threats from Ron to treat her right. After all, the four-time travelers were bound by a deep trust after so many years of only really having each other. The month of December, Harry spent alternating between learning to swim and learning to dance. He ended up finding the latter easier than the former, since he already had very good coordination from broom riding and sword fighting. Still, by the time the Yule Ball came around, he was able to at least move around underwater. As the champions and their dates lined up to open the ball, Harry took a moment to admire the female forms around him. Even though he was mentally in his 20s by this point, this year was the first time his hormones were really kicking in. Fleur de Lacre, the French quarter-villa champion, was as beautiful as always in a simple silver dress that highlighted her figure. Cho Chang, the Ravenclaw seeker, was quite pretty in a Chinese dress, but Harry's attraction to her was soured by the fact that she contributed the bullying of Luna Lovegood in every loop. Hermione was wearing a beautiful periwinkle blue dress, and she'd styled her usually messy, bushy head of hair into a beautiful and fancy hairdo. But in Harry's opinion, his date was perhaps the best of them all. She retained her usual eccentric jewelry of radish earrings, but had foregone her bottle cap necklace in favor of a more elegant silver chain. Her long hair had been straightened into silky blonde locks that flowed freely down her back. Her dress was azure blue and came to about halfway down her lower legs. When McGonagall called them in, Harry and Luna were the last couple to enter, and his date followed his lead as he began a simple waltz step. After a minute or so, Harry started mixing things up, adding in a few spins and dips to keep things interesting for Luna. Soon enough, the opening dance came to an end, and the dancers exited the dance floor in favor of the champions' table, where the three school headmasters were waiting along with Ludo Bagman, as well as Percy Weasley of all people. Apparently, Bartemius Crouch was sick and had asked his assistant to substitute for him. This seemed odd to Harry, and somewhat of a diplomatic faux pas, but he mostly ignored his friend's rule-devoted brother in favor of enjoying his meal and the game of one-upmanship going on between the three heads. Apparently, Dumbledore had discovered the Room of Requirement once while looking for a bathroom. Harry personally thought that a swimming pool was a far more interesting use of the impressive room than a room full of chamber pots. After dinner, Harry enjoyed a few more dances on the floor with Luna before they split up to dance with their other friends. Harry took one dance with Hermione and one with Ginny, who was ecstatic that Thebuhu wanted to dance with her. Harry imagined that in another life, one where he spent more time at the Burrow, Ginny might have been able to become one of Harry's friends and not just a fangirl. He imagined that had they not been able to avert the tragedy of her first year, they might have been able to bond over the shared experience of facing, and if the fact that she was able to throw the diary away was any indication, fighting Voldemort. But thanks to the time loop, neither of these were the case, so Ginny would remain merely a fan of his celebrity image and the sister of his best friend, at least for now. Harry also made sure to offer Tracy, as his best friend's date, one dance, as well as one dance with his fellow champion Fleur de Lacquer. After these dances, Harry returned to Luna, dancing a bit more before they explored the outdoor rose gardens that had been set up for the ball attendees to enjoy. While there, they heard Snape and Karkaroff have a confrontation, likely over their mutual status as traitors to Voldemort, and a discussion between Hagrid and Madame Maxime over their half-giant status. Toward the end of the ball, Cedric approached Harry. "Have you solved the clue in your egg yet?" he asked. "I have," Harry assured him. "And you?" "Likewise," Cedric said. "If you hadn't, I was going to give you a hint, repay you for your hint back before the first task. It saved my life." Harry shook his head. "It's fine. I don't expect repayment. I just didn't want anyone to end up charbroiled." "You were the one who almost ended up roasted," Cedric said. "I mean, Merlin, you fought a dragon with a sword and a slingshot." Harry nodded. "Good luck with your preparations, Diggory." "You too, Potter." Ron and Hermione were tense for a few weeks after the Yule Ball. Apparently, from what Neville told him, they had gotten into an argument that night over Hermione's choice to go to the ball with Victor. The two boys suspected that Ron had a crush on Hermione, but was too stubborn to show it. They also thought that Hermione might reciprocate, but was equally stubborn. Once they looped back, and their bodies were back to being 11 years old, Harry thought that they'd be able to let cooler and less hormonal heads prevail. Still, the time-traveling quartet worked tirelessly to prepare for the second task. Hermione and Ron put aside their differences to create the enchanted objects Harry needed to complete the task, while Neville bought some gillyweed and used it to explore the Black Lake, creating a rough map for Harry to follow when the time came. And on a cold January day, the students and staff of 3 schools assembled to watch 4 children dive into a freezing lake. Ludo Bagman explained that they would be using magical viewing spells to show the audience what was happening beneath the lake's waters. Well, almost, because Harry had finally figured out what the things he and the other champions would sorely miss were. Hermione was missing, as was Luna. He couldn't spot Cho Chang either, though Delacquer's date, Roger Davies, was present in the stands. The organizers had decided to up the ante by taking people. Harry checked that he had everything he needed: the runic rebreather, the neckband enchanted with a warming charm, 2 enchanted knives holstered around his waist, and a set of transfigured fins that he was strapping to his feet, inspired by the Muggle's swimming aid, but charmed to provide a bit of extra thrust and never to come loose from his feet unless removed by Harry or Hermione. None of these things would require Harry to use his magic in any way, ensuring that his core would remain undamaged. He had his wand with him, but would only use it in an absolute emergency. On the whistle, he awkwardly raced to the lake's shore and dove into the water, placing the rebreather in his mouth as he did so. The lake water was frigid, but not nearly as bad as Harry had been expecting, for the enchanted amulet that he was wearing protected him from the worst of it. He moved his legs in simultaneous motion, executing a dolphin kick to propel him forward. Once he was away from the shore, he maintained a good distance from the lake bottom, aware thanks to Neville's explorations that vicious grindylows lived in the plants that line the lake bed. While he had his knives, he would rather not have to combat the water-dwelling monsters in their own habitat. Eventually, he started hearing singing in the distance, a choir of merfolk voices singing, guiding him toward where the hostages were kept. Your times hath gone so tarry not, lest what you seek stays here to rot. After a brief encounter with the grindylows that ended in a draw, with Harry slicing at several that came near him with his knives, he approached the underwater village. He was the second one to arrive at the bottom of the lake. As he arrived, he saw a half-shark Victor Crumb trying to chew through the ropes binding the unconscious form of Hermione Granger. Harry immediately focused on Luna, who was tied up next to Hermione. Slicing through her ropes with his knives, he proceeded straight up, wanting to get her out of the water as soon as possible. While he briefly considered staying behind to free all the hostages, he reasoned that the newer and safer Triwizard Tournament probably wouldn't risk a hostage dying just because a champion failed to solve their clue. Not to mention, he was severely handicapped with his inability to use magic. When Luna breached the surface, she immediately gasped for air. "Cold," she said. Harry withdrew his wand from where he'd stowed it and handed it to her. "Take my wand," Harry instructed, "and cast a warming charm on yourself. I'll help you get to shore." "Actually," Luna said, "I have an idea, a chiascal broomstick." The time-looping quartet had made sure to teach Luna a few of the most useful spells in every loop, and the summoning charm was at the top of the list. While Harry swam back to shore using his fins, the soaking wet Luna accompanied him, flying on a school broom. About 10 minutes later, Harry pulled himself out of the water, and both he and Luna were ushered into the medical tent for Madame Pomfrey to fuss over them and their hypothermia. As the first one to return, Victor Crumb, though fastest in the water, had difficulty getting his hostage free. Harry received the highest score on the second task. Crumb came in second, and Diggory in third. Delacour ultimately failed the task due to a Grindylow ambush, and her sister had to be returned by the merfolk, but she still received 25 of 50 possible points. After the scores were given, Harry joined with his friends to hear about the next task. "The third task will take place on 9 March, Ludo Bagman announced, and will test the champion's cleverness and resourcefulness. Each champion will, between now and the next task, prepare 3 boxes, each one containing one of these statues." Bagman handed each champion 3 identical inch-tall statuettes of themselves. The boxes may include any defense that the champion may devise, so long as it is non-lethal and does not cause any irreversible harm. They must, however, construct the box entirely themselves, using only magic they cast themselves, and only raw materials that they collect themselves or purchase on a 20-galleon budget. Any violation of these rules will be considered a default of the Goblet of Fire's contract and punished accordingly. During the third task, each champion will be given one of each of their competitors' boxes and have 2 hours to retrieve the statues inside, using their wands and any other things they may choose to bring, with the same restrictions and budget as for the previous part. They will be scored on the effectiveness of their own protections and their ability to break into the other boxes. Harry turned to look at his friends. "If I have to do everything myself," Harry muttered, "how do I even compete in this?" Chapter 21, On the Defensive. "You know," Harry said the day after the second task, "I have to wonder if this third task was chosen specifically to mess with me. I mean, I know that the tasks were probably agreed upon ahead of time, but still. I kind of see your point, mate, Ron said, but you just have to do your best. Or not, Neville argued. Is this the point where we consider just triggering a reset? You already nearly got burned to death, Harry. And then yesterday, you and Hermione and Luna all nearly drowned. It's not worth it. Hermione shook her head in denial. I'm still not entirely convinced that doing a reset before the tournament ends won't damage Harry's magic. Besides, I got a copy of the specific rules for this upcoming task, and Harry doesn't technically have to use spells. He's allowed potions, too. But I've never heard of a curse-breaking potion or anything like that, Harry argued. And I'm fairly sure the rules say that I have to at least make an honest attempt at every task. Well, for making your box, you could booby-trap it to release some sort of potion, Ron suggested. Mostly we've avoided brewing poisons, Harry said thoughtfully. But remember our very first class with Snape. The failed potion I made, Neville exclaimed. It caused some pretty bad boils when it hit me. I doubt anyone could focus on continuing the task if they got hit with it. But I'm not sure I remember how I messed up that badly. It was over a decade ago, I think. We can experiment around, even if Harry has to be the one to brew the final product by the rules, Hermione said. And since whatever trap I make will have to be entirely mechanical, Harry added, the other champions may not be able to detect with their usual spells. Or they might specifically learn spells to detect physical traps just because they know you won't use magic, Ron countered. But you might get one of them, and it's an honest attempt. Which is all I really need to do. While his friends experimented on brewing a deliberately volatile and failed potion, Harry focused on figuring out how the potion would be released. He ended up sending a request to Hermione's parents via Hedwig to buy a muggle water gun for him in order to understanding its mechanism. The problem remained, however, of how to break into his opponent's boxes, so he had a lot of reading to do. Luna, not wanting to be anywhere near dangerous potions research, had volunteered to help him. I need, he said, some potion that can break through the strongest materials and eat through the most powerful enchantments, he muttered as he read through a hefty tome from the restricted section on dangerous potions. And it can't require expensive, hard-to-get ingredients or any magic in the brewing process. But you already have something that can do that, said Luna. What? Harry asked. It's not a potion, though, just a potent venom. Harry shouted in glee. Basilisk venom, he exclaimed. And since I most certainly helped kill it, and the corpse is just sitting down there, it took founder-level protections to stop the basilisk fang from penetrating the locket, and I doubt that any of my fellow competitors are capable of that. I have a solution, but why, he wondered aloud, didn't I think of that before? Your head was full of raxperts, Luna opined. You were too focused on the trees of the forest to pay attention to its soil. Fair enough, said Harry. Now all I need to do is hope my friends come up with something suitable for my boxes, and I'm all set. That weekend, Harry and Hermione took a trip down to the Chamber of Secrets, gathering up 3 basilisk fangs and wrapping them up in one of Harry's old robes for safekeeping. Brilliant solution, Harry, Hermione complimented him. It was all Luna, Harry said humbly and admiringly. Her mind works in amazing ways. Sometimes incomprehensible, yes, but definitely amazing. You really like her, don't you? She asked. I do, he replied, even if it seems weird that a 20-something man is kind of dating a 13-year-old girl. But you're not 20-something, nor are you a man. Not really. We may have a lot of memories, a lot of experience, but we're still children in body and magic. Just very mature children. Fair enough, Harry said, as he began the stair climb back up to Myrtle's bathroom. And it's not like she doesn't entirely understand the situation. It would be creepier if I were trying to get into a serious relationship with someone who wasn't aware of the loops. Hermione nodded. Neville hasn't been able to get that close to Ginny, she said, even if they might work out well as a couple. Same with Ron and Tracy. And you and Crumb? Harry asked, a bit of a teasing tone in his voice. Same. We kissed once at the end of the night, but I don't see our relationship going anywhere. And not just because of the loop, or because we're from different countries, or even because he's a star athlete and I'm a bookworm. There's just not a spark. I get what you mean, Harry said. How's the potion progressing? We've melted 3 cauldrons, but we think we're getting close to a workable formula. Good. Harry and Hermione were silent for a while as they continued climbing up the seemingly endless staircase. It's frustrating, you know, being stuck in this tournament. Being on the defensive. Exactly. Same here, she agreed. The first time we went through our first year, or our second, or even our third, we were doing things. We were taking active steps to solve things. Investigating the stone, investigating the chamber, learning the Patronus. But for this year, we're just going through the tasks and little else. We destroyed the diadem, Hermione pointed out. That was just chance, Harry argued. What have we really done to find out who put me in this? To figure out if it's a dark plot or a distraction from Voldemort's real plans or just a really poorly thought-out prank? Nothing, Hermione admitted. But with your magic in danger and 5 tasks to prepare for, what can we really do? We can always investigate more next loop when we're seeing things for a second time. That's 4 years from now for us, at least. You know I won't forget, Hermione said proudly, and I have a feeling that no matter what, we'll find out what the plot is this loop anyway. Our enemies like to gloat. Harry thought of Voldemort forcing Quirrell to let them speak face to face, of Tom Riddle's trickery, and of Lockhart's grandstanding before he obliviated them. She had a point. Well then, Harry said, we just have to wait and see then, as much as I hate it. Harry arrived at the third task, carrying 3 fairly large wooden boxes and 1 wrapped bundle containing his basilisk fangs. Do you affirm that everything you are bringing to this task is made by your own hand and wand from materials gathered yourself or purchased for less than 20 galleons total? Dumbledore asked, and Harry felt a slight twinge in his core as the binding tightened around him. I do, Harry answered, and the binding released. He had had a not very fun time learning the basics of non-magical woodworking using transfigured tools, but he'd done well enough to make a simple box. The creation of a water, or in this case, potion, gun was far more challenging, but he'd managed it in time for the task. The box had no latch or lock, but when it was opened, a pulley mechanism would trigger the powerful Boils-inducing potion to spray on the opener's hand. He only partially listened, as Ludo Bagman announced the beginning of the task to him, for he already knew what he had to do. As soon as the starting bell rang, he drew forth one of the basilisk fangs and plunged it into Cedric Diggory's box. The potency of the venom easily broke through the enchantments, so Harry stabbed and stabbed until the box entirely fell apart. He spied the statuette of the Hufflepuff champion and used the fang to knock it out of the wreckage of the box before picking it up. 1 down. He repeated the procedure on Fleur de Lacquer's box, but the French champion had played a trick. When he reached out to grasp the statuette, he felt a stunning spell pass through him just before he fell unconscious. He woke up again in Madame Pomfrey's care a few minutes later. Having been defeated by de Lacquer's trapped statuette, he was out of the third task entirely, which was fine by him. Once he was declared fine by the Hogwarts Mediwitch, he went out to view the remainder of the task. It seemed that all 3 of his competitors had gone for his box first, thinking that anything protected without spellwork would be easy pickings. Only Diggory, however, had been hit by the potion, with de Lacquer having chosen to vanish his box entirely and Crumb having managed to dodge the potion blast with his Quidditch instincts. Diggory had not, however, stopped the task, instead bandaging his hand and continuing to tackle the foreign champion's boxes with dogged Hufflepuff determination. Harry could greatly respect that. In the end, after 2 hours, the bell sounded again to end the task. Harry didn't really care about how his opponents had scored, only his own results. "What was it you were using to break into the boxes?" Madame Maxime asked. "A basilisk fang," Harry replied truthfully, which caused the judges to look at him skeptically. "And where do you claim you found a basilisk fang, boy?" Karkaroff demanded. "On a basilisk corpse," Harry continued, "in the Chamber of Secrets. My friends and I found it a while ago, if that's all." Harry knew that this would make Dumbledore suspicious, but it hardly mattered. This loop would be ending soon enough anyway. He just knew it. Despite what he'd said to Hermione, he was certain that this was a trap by Voldemort, and Voldemort's traps always ended one way. The judges gave him 10 points for managing to break through 2 boxes and get 1 statue. Harry was entirely fine with that. The 4th task was announced to be happening at the end of April, and Harry was actually optimistic about it for once. Bagman said it would be a series of aerial challenges, with the competitors allowed to choose their own methods of flying. Harry asked for a clarification that any mode of magical flight whatsoever was allowed, which the judges confirmed. While all of his competitors would probably be using brooms, Harry chose an entirely different option, one that wouldn't risk straining or damaging his magical core. The day after the 3rd task, Harry went to Hagrid and asked to borrow one of his herd of hippogriffs. Draco Malfoy had once more gotten himself scratched by the hippogriff Buckbeak and tried yet again to get said hippogriff killed for it, but the time-traveling quartet had managed to abscond with the innocent beast before the executioner could arrive, which had finally endeared them to Hagrid despite their Slytherin sorting. Buckbeak had been reintegrated into the Hogwarts herd with slightly altered coloration and a new name. Harry refused to tempt fate by riding the newly named Witherwings, but instead chose a female auburn-coated hippogriff named Stormswift. He spent a few hours every afternoon getting to know his new mount, learning how she flew and gaining her trust. By the time the day of the 4th task arrived, he and Stormswift were capable of moving through the skies as a single, cohesive aerial unit. He was the 3rd of the 4 champions to arrive at the start of the 4th task, with his wand, knives, and sling in his pocket, a sword on his back, and Stormswift walking beside him. What is that doing here?" Bagman asked, as he backed away from the hippogriff nervously. "You did say I could choose my method flight, Mr. Bagman," Harry said, "and Stormswift has agreed to carry me." "I meant you could use any broom, or a flying carpet. You would have been exempted from the laws, or even another charmed object." "I asked for clarification, sir, and you gave it, and the contract doesn't seem to disagree with me." "Very well," Bagman said before turning to address all of the champions. "The 4th task, as you know, is an aerial obstacle course. You will be scored on the time it takes you to complete it, with points deducted for injuries received, deviating from the course, or being forced to land. You will be running through the course one at a time. This bag," he said, as he withdrew a small cloth bag from his pocket, "contains coins numbered from 1 through 4, which shall be used to determine the order in which you go. As always, ladies first." Fleur de Lacquer withdrew the coin marked 3, and Cedric Diggory got 4. Crumb got the 2 coin, which, of course, left Harry to draw the 1 coin and to go first. "You and your hippogriff will go first, Mr. Potter, as soon as I reach the announcer's booth." "Understood, sir." "Then good luck to all of you." 3 minutes later, Harry heard Bagman's voice sounding over the arena, describing the challenge that they would be facing. "And now, our first competitor, Harry Potter." Harry stepped out, ignoring the audience's cheers and jeers. He knew that a lot of people didn't support him because he was a Slytherin, and others because he was the boy who lived, and yet others because he was refusing to use magic in a magical tournament. He didn't care about any of that, just getting through the tasks. He did not need to bow to Stormswift at this point, only give her a slight nod before mounting her and walking her to the start line. "Are you ready, girl?" he asked his mount quietly as he quickly scanned the arena to get an idea of what he would have to face. It appeared that there were 7 sections of the course going clockwise around the arena, 3 challenges by aerial beasts, separated by 4 flying skills segments. In 3, 2, 1, Bagman announced before a loud bell rang out, and Harry urged Stormswift forward and into the air. "Let's fly up, Stormswift." Harry tugged gently on the hippogriff's bridle, pulling her into a steep and rapid ascent 100 meters up to clear a bar labeled 1A that was floating there. As soon as he passed over the bar, he leaned forward and Stormswift tucked her wings and dove like a raptor back toward the ground. Passing under the bar labeled 1B, Stormswift pulled the hippogriff equivalent of a Ransky feint, pulling back up to go over the bar labeled 1C, a mere 50 meters above the ground. With that, the climbs and dives section was complete, and Harry faced his first living obstacle. It was a flock of 100 birds, a vicious species known as stymphalians. Even Muggles knew about these flesh-eating creatures, for they had been immortalized in the Greek myth of the labors of Heracles. Thankfully, the myth also recorded how the famed hero had defeated the birds by the use of a loud sound to scare them off. Stymphalians were one of the many creatures that Hermione and Luna had prepared him to face, so he knew exactly what to do. "Sing, Stormswift," he commanded, and the hippogriff opened her beak to let out a horrid noise, Harry joining in with the worst singing he could manage, which was pretty bad. As the pair's combined cacophony disoriented the flock, Harry drew his sword in his right hand and a knife in his left to defend them from above, while Stormswift's talons lashed out at any who would try to attack from below. 30 seconds and 5 injured Stymphalians later, they were through the second stage. The third stage was a zigzagging slalom course, which Stormswift easily navigated as Harry led her in a repetitive left and right motion. When they passed the marker labeled 3V, the slalom ended, and Harry was close enough to see the instructions for Stage 4. Retrieve one of the treasures from the griffin's nest to continue. The griffins in question were a pair of fierce lion-eagle creatures, one male and one female, that were guarding a tall stone pillar. Atop the pillar was a nest with 4 simple golden crowns. Harry didn't want to risk Stormswift in a fight with the griffins, so he decided on another approach. "Take me directly above the nest, girl," he said. As Stormswift passed over the top of the pillar, Harry leapt off her back, falling a few meters down to stick a fairly good landing on the pillar, his fall slightly cushioned by the leaves and sticks of which the nest had been constructed. While one griffin pursued Stormswift, whose natural agility and smaller size was keeping her alive against the larger creature, the other griffin flew toward Harry. Striking out with his sword, he deflected 1, 2, 3 strikes of the griffin's claws with one hand, while with the other, he fumbled around to grasp one of the crowns and place it on his head, hoping that the organizers hadn't decided to trap or curse the crowns with a spell that he couldn't counter. When he wore the crown, thankfully, nothing happened. "Stormswift," he cried out as he continued to fend off the griffin's attacks. When he saw that he had the hippogriff's attention, he dove off the pillar in the vague direction of Stormswift. This was a risky move, but he knew that within a few seconds, he would either be back on the Hogwarts Express or on Stormswift's back. Spreading himself out to maximize his air resistance and increase the time that Stormswift had to catch him, Harry watched the ground get closer and closer and closer. And then, suddenly, a red blur appeared beneath him, and Harry felt Stormswift's soft feathers on his face. "Thanks, girl," he said gratefully as he grasped her feathers so as not to be thrown off while Stormswift pulled up from the steep dive she'd had to make to catch Harry. "Let's end this thing." The fifth stage was a series of straightaways punctuated by sharp 180-degree turns that Stormswift executed beautifully. As amazing as flight on a broom was, it was inevitably inferior to what a true master of the skies could perform. As a bird animagus, although he'd been unable to use his form for months, Harry knew this very well. The pair approached a flock of brightly colored birds whose beaks were open with song, but he could not hear. He knew what they were, F-whoopers, the birds whose singing could induce insanity. Just like with the Stymphalians, Harry borrowed a Greek solution, plugging his ears with candle wax that he'd brought along just in case. He knew that Stormswift wouldn't be affected by the madness-inducing song, and so he trusted her to fly them straight through the sixth stage. The seventh and final stage was very simple, a straight shot back to the starting line, as fast as they could manage. Harry leaned on Stormswift to push her speed as high as she could, the hippogriff's wings flapping with strong beats as she carried the two of them to the end of the course. As they passed the finish line, Harry whooped with joy. For the first time, he'd truly enjoyed completing a task. Chapter 22. Grave Tidings. The first thing that Harry's friends did to him when he landed on Stormswift was slap him. "Even if you can't actually die," Hermione whisper shouted in his ear, "it was still bloody terrifying seeing you fall from that pillar. And worse, you scared Luna." At this, Harry became contrite. He'd forgotten that his close friend and kind of girlfriend didn't view the time loops in quite the same way, and that she had probably completely freaked out about him falling to a very painful death. Once his friends were done chastising him for his beyond reckless stupidity, they all turned to watch Crumb finish up his run. Hermione's Yule Ball date had ridden his firebolt and used its speed and maneuverability to complete the course slightly faster than Harry and Stormswift. The French champion, despite her Vila heritage, was not particularly skilled on a broom, and as a result was slow in the odd-numbered stages, though she acquitted herself well against the flying creatures. And Diggory, while a skilled seeker, struggled to get past the griffins, ultimately recording the slowest time of the four. Ultimately, the judges gave Harry a score of 40 out of 50 for this task, seeing how he had handled the Stymphalians and F-Whoopers perfectly and demonstrated great skill in taming and riding Stormswift. Insofar as he cared about the scores, the result made up for his abysmal performance in the third task. As it stood, though, the standings were as followed: Crumb in the lead, followed by Delacour and Diggory, and last Harry. For someone who hadn't used a single spell in the tournament since the first minute of the first task, Harry thought he was doing rather well to have scored at all. The fifth and final task of the Triwizard Tournament shall take place on the 24th of June, Bagman announced, and the champions shall be informed of it exactly 1 month beforehand. That gave Harry and his fellow champions a month off of worrying about the tournament, which frankly meant little to him, seeing as he was going to be spending that month worrying anyway. As the end of the tournament neared, Harry got more and more annoyed with his inability to cast spells. Yes, he recalled the reading he'd done about binding magical contracts, and yes, he remembered the minute pain he'd felt casting just 2 minor spells during the first task. But magic was one of the things in Harry's life that gave him the most joy, and to be cut off from it was truly sad. Not to mention the mockery from his fellow Slytherins, and from the school at large over not being able to cast spells any more was getting on his nerves. It was quite a relief then, when on the 24th of May, the 4 champions were called down to see what the final task was, a maze, as Victor Crumb so succinctly put it. Apparently, it would be filled with magical traps and stocked with a menagerie of creatures provided by Hagrid. A true test of magical skill and knowledge, or, in Harry's case, a test of how long he could last in a maze designed to test adult wizards using nothing but a sword. After the task reveal, Crumb pulled him aside to ensure that he wasn't encroaching on Harry's territory, romantically, by wooing Hermione. Harry assured him that he and Hermione weren't dating, but didn't comment on the fact that there was something happening between Hermione and Ron. Whether the two longtime friends would end up in a romantic relationship together was something Harry had no clue about. Their conversation was interrupted by the appearance of an extremely delirious Bartemius Crouch coming out of the Forbidden Forest, asking for Dumbledore. Harry had no clue why Crouch was wandering through the forest, nor what the bad thing was for which Crouch was apparently responsible. Harry rushed to get the Hogwarts headmaster, leaving the magic-capable Durmstrang student to guard and keep an eye on Crouch. Unfortunately, by the time they got back, Crumb was stunned and Crouch gone. Even ignoring the diplomatic incident this nearly caused, this was extraordinarily concerning to Harry, and his friends agreed. Whoever had taken Crouch was mostly likely in the school with them at that very moment. The dream Harry had in ancient runes the next day only made things worse. If what he was seeing was true, then all of his worst fears were realized. Voldemort was back and getting stronger. He had a faithful servant in Hogwarts, and said servant had gotten away with stunning Crumb, killing Crouch, and hiding the body with no one the wiser. Harry immediately informed both Sirius and Dumbledore of this, but in the end, no action could be taken based on a vague dream vision. On the day of the fifth task, Harry was bouncing off the walls with anticipatory energy. This morning, Sirius and Remus would be coming to Hogwarts to spend the day with him. This evening, he would traverse the maze. And tonight, the Triwizard Tournament would finally be over, and Harry would finally get to use magic again. He already had his wand securely in its holster, ready to be released. He planned on his first spell being the Patronus, for no other magic could adequately express Harry's sheer joy. "Hello, Pup," Sirius called as he approached the Slytherin table, Remus following close behind. The Slytherins flinched away from the approaching werewolf, but Harry didn't care in the least. Ignoring all of the decorum and propriety that Slytherin House had tried to teach him over the past 4 years, Harry leapt off his seat and into his godfather's arms. "It's so good to see you, Padfoot," he said, his words muffled as he spoke into the fabric of Sirius's sleeve. Even if his godfather didn't hear his exact words, Harry knew he got the sentiment. Waving goodbye to his friends, Harry, Sirius, and Remus passed by the head table and out of the great hall, ignoring Snape's obligatory sneer at the trio. Together, they spent the day enjoying the June weather, exploring the castle and grounds, and just smiling at being a family, a strange, makeshift, found family, but a family nonetheless. "I'm still furious that Dumbledore couldn't prevent you from being entered into this madness. Not to mention, you were forced to lose out on a year of magical education." Sirius snarled when the tournament was brought up. "It's fine, Padfoot," Harry assured him. "I survived. My magic is fine, and I practiced ahead plenty." "A regular Ravenclaw in Slytherin colors, aren't you?" Remus teased him. Harry smiled slightly. "Slytherins taught me a lot," he said carefully, skirting around the protections on his temporal knowledge. "About wizarding politics, about pureblood culture, about how all those bigots think. But if I had to be sorted again, I probably wouldn't go there." "I wonder," Sirius muttered. "You wonder what, Padfoot?" Remus asked. If Reggie thought the same thing as Harry did, before the end. "I don't know whether he did, Siri," Remus said, giving Harry's godfather a reassuring touch on the shoulder. "I doubt it," Harry said. "We all have the potential for all of the houses inside us, I think. Even if for some people, Draco Malfoy," Harry said the last 2 words under his breath, "have been raised to only show a single house. Regulus was brave at the end. I think even Malfoy could be, too, given the right circumstances." "A Malfoy brave?" Sirius asked skeptically. "Really?" "I did say given the right circumstances, Sirius," Harry said with a small laugh. "The person he is now, though, when I don't have to room with him any more, I'll be glad to be away from him." The 2 marauders and the son of one sat in companionable silence on a grassy hill for a minute or so. "Did I tell you that we've been corresponding with your friend Ron's twin brothers?" Remus asked. "They have some really good ideas for a joke store, and Padfoot is practically throwing the Black Fortune at them." Soon enough, Harry's day with the marauders came to an end. There was some pointing and muttering from his classmates as he made his way to the entrance of the maze. Apparently, Rita Skeeter had put out an article about his scar vision that painted him as deranged. Harry couldn't care less about the nuisance gossip columnist, who had been dragging his reputation through the mud ever since the weighing of the wands, not when he had a far more important thing to worry about. Hermione, however, said that she had a theory on how Skeeter was getting her stories, one that she was planning on testing that very evening. Harry watched as Victor Crumb, then Fleur de Lacquer, then Cedric Diggory all entered the maze before Ludo Bagman finally gave him the signal to head in. Harry's strategy, insofar as he had to have a strategy in order for the goblet of fire not to hurt his magic, was Aesopian, slow and steady wins the race. He carefully made his way through the maze, avoiding what obstacles he could and facing what ones he couldn't with his strength, speed, and sword. The boggart he faced took the form of a Dementor, and Harry nearly fled before realizing that the organizers, however stupid they might be, wouldn't put an actual Dementor inside the hedge maze and risk a fate worse than death for the competitors. He managed to keep his cool as he passed by the image of the soul-sucking monstrosity and continued forward. The golden mist that made Harry think he was upside down was a fun effect. He'd have to figure out how to do it himself once the tournament was over. Again, by keeping a cool head, he was able to pass through the spell and continue on his way. While Harry's path was oddly easy, the other champions were facing a far greater challenge. Namely, that Victor Crumb had decided to win by taking out his competition. Harry came across Crumb casting Cruciune Diggory, which put de Lacquer's earlier scream that resounded across the maze in a new, more sinister light. Harry managed to knock him out with a blow from the flat of his sword, rescuing his schoolmate. The pair set off further in the maze, both determined to get to the center and end this. One Sphinx riddle later, and Harry was at the maze's center. He was about to reach out to grab the Triwizard Cup when, suddenly, he heard a rustling sound in the hedges behind him. Spinning around, he saw an acromantula rapidly approaching. It took every bit of the sword training he'd done over the past year to hold off the massive spider's 8 armored legs and evade its venomous bite. Thankfully, the timely arrival of Cedric Diggory allowed the Slytherin and the Hufflepuff the chance to work together to drive the beast off. "If you want to race for the cup," Harry said, as he examined his body and found that his left leg had been cut by the acromantula, "then you'll win this." Diggory shook his head. "No," he said. "If you hadn't sent your friend Longbottom to warn me about the dragon, I would have been toast in the first task. Not to mention, you got this far despite being 3 years younger than the rest of us and barely using any magic. The cup is yours, fair and square, if you want to take it." "Do I want to take it?" Harry asked himself. On the one hand, he had almost won a magic tournament without any magic, and he was extraordinarily proud of the fact. On the other hand, taking the cup would be legitimizing once more his participation in this farce of a tournament, and he didn't want to do that. Then, Harry had an idea. "Together, then," he declared, as he used his sword as a cane to walk toward the cup. "Fair is fair, a victory for Hogwarts." "You know," Diggory said as he joined Harry, "I'd have expected something like that out of a Hufflepuff, but not a Slytherin." "I'm not exactly your typical Slytherin, am I? On 3. Diggory nodded. 1. The two champions stood on either side of the cup, sharing a smile of mutual victory. 2. The Slytherin and the Hufflepuff reached out in unison toward the cup's 2 handles. 3. Touching the handles at the same time, the 2 students were whisked away by the navel-tugging feeling of a portkey. When they landed, Harry was expecting to find himself at the winner's podium, but instead, he was in a dark, eerie cemetery. "Wands out, do you reckon?" Cedric asked, and Harry nodded in agreement. Despite the situation they now faced, he couldn't help but hide his glee as his wand snapped into his hand, as the bindings on his core unraveled as he could finally use his magic again. Behind him, Harry heard footsteps. Spinning around with wand and sword in hand, he spotted a hooded figure approaching quickly with his wand out and a bundle in his hands. From the bundle, a horrible voice emanated. "Kill the spare." And before either Harry or Diggory could react, a flash of green light leapt from the figure's wand and toward the Hufflepuff champion, ending his life. A second light, this one the red Aufstupefy, leapt toward Harry, and he cast Aprotgarshil to block it. The figure's attacks were undeterred, and with Harry's wand dueling skills rusty from disuse, he couldn't stop himself from being hit by a spell and falling into unconsciousness. When Harry woke up, it was to the sight of Lucius Malfoy preparing a massive potion and the feeling of his own body being bound entirely in magical ropes. He saw that his sword was laying discarded a few meters away, but far out of reach, while his wand was sticking out of Malfoy's pocket. He concluded grimly that he had no choice here but to play along until he found out what Voldemort's ultimate plan was, at which point he would escape, in life or in death. As Malfoy began his ritual chant, the plan soon became clear. Bone of the father, unknowingly given, you will restore your son. Bone dust floated from the grave beneath Harry and into the potion, which turned a poisonous blue. Flesh of the servant, willingly sacrificed, you will revive your master. Harry was surprised as Lucius Malfoy willingly lopped off his own pinky finger in the service of his master. The aristocrat's devotion to his cause was disturbingly absolute. Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, you will resurrect your foe. The true reason behind Harry's entry into the Triwizard Tournament was revealed: to acquire Harry's blood to let Voldemort rise again, greater and more terrible than ever before. Harry hid a smile as Voldemort bragged, first to Harry and then to the Death Eaters who assembled to greet him. He memorized every word of the Dark Lord's story, every Death Eater's name that he spoke. He was glad to hear that Voldemort did not suspect him in the least for playing a part in his failure to acquire the stone, nor in the mysterious vanishing of his precious treasure. That is, Horcrux, that Lucius Malfoy so foolishly gave away. The only thing that Voldemort maddeningly refused to reveal was the identity of the faithful servant who had broken free to find him in Albania. And then Voldemort called him up to duel. And now, he declared, I am going to prove my power by killing him here and now in front of you all, when there is no Dumbledore to help him and no mother to die for him. Now untie him, Lucius, and give him his wand. Harry stood up shakily as the father of his current housemate did his lord's bidding. Harry gratefully grasped the conduit of his magic, using it to cast small healing spells at the cuts on his leg and arm. If he was going to do this, he would need to be at his best. And even if he knew that he was likely to die today and reset the time loop, he would go out defiant, just like Ron had so many loops ago. Bow to death, Harry, Voldemort commanded, and though Harry was able to resist Hiss Imperius, he did not to stop the spell that physically bent his spine downward. No, he would let Voldemort have his theatrics, saving his strength and magic for the actual fight. When Voldemort's spell released, he immediately followed it with a Crucio, and Harry was ready, rolling to the side as he shot back Adafind und Eruducto. Voldemort smiled, seeming pleased that his enemy was putting up a fight. Harry stood up again, shooting a trio of stupefy-spells, which passed an Avada Kedavra from Voldemort that he had to summon a gravestone to block. The gravestone shattered, peppering Harry with shards of stone. He saw that his stunning spells, as expected, had been blocked. Harry shot off a massive gout of flame, quickly followed by a conjured arrow hiding behind it. Voldemort countered the fire with an even larger mass of water, some of which turned to steam, and the rest of which knocked Harry on his back. He was, however, pleased to see that his trick worked, with an arrow embedded in Voldemort's shoulder. Before Harry could make another move, Voldemort sent a powerful binding spell at him, wrapping him in glowing magical ropes that he could not counter. Instead, Harry tried to summon his sword, which flew into his hand. The Death Eaters laughed as he awkwardly tried to use it to cut the ropes, achieving some success, but not enough. A simple spoken depulso from Voldemort blasted the sword out of Harry's hand. You fought well, Harry, he said almost kindly, but not well enough. Harry had to agree with his foe's assessment. If only he hadn't been so out of practice with his magic. And so, being a merciful lord, I shall grant you a swift and painless death. Avada Kedavra. The green light flew toward Harry, and he felt the pain of the killing curse tear his soul from his body as the world shattered. Chapter 23. Know Thy Enemy. Has anybody, Hermione began before turning to Harry. Harry, are you all right? Harry nodded shakily. I'm fine now, of course, but it was Voldemort. Voldemort? Neville asked as he and Hermione sat down and locked the compartment door. Voldemort, Harry repeated somberly. His resurrection, the bone of his father, the flesh of his servant Lucius Malfoy, and the blood of his enemy, me. He got his body back. Oh, and he bragged a whole lot, which is good for us. Do tell, Ron said with a hungry grin. Well, Harry said, I told you about the ritual ingredients his chant so helpfully described. He even told me where we were located, in the graveyard of a town called Little Hangleton. He gave me the names of a dozen different Death Eaters. I'll write them down for you in a moment, but it was basically a last name roster of our Slytherin housemates. Which raises the question, Hermione said. Which house are we going to go into this time? Hufflepuff, Harry insisted immediately. It's the only one we haven't done, and also Cedric Diggory. We took the cup together, you know, a victory for Hogwarts and all that, and then Voldemort ordered him killed. Kill the spare, just like that. Then we go to Hufflepuff, Neville agreed. For Cedric. For Cedric, Harry murmured in response. Even if he's alive again now, he was the first death I ever witnessed that wasn't one after-deaths. We should have you write down everything you remember tonight then, said Hermione, so that you don't forget any of the details. But we can't act on it until after the year is over, Ron pointed out. The stuff we already do under Quirrell's nose is risky enough. Actually, he blames his failure to get the stone on a trick of Dumbledore's, Harry revealed. Really? Ron exclaimed. That's good for us. But still, Voldemort might use his access to the castle to check on the diadem or the chamber. So we have to leave those be, Neville finished for his friend. We have more than enough on our plate in first year anyway. And plenty of time in our second and third years, without the diary or Sirius to deal with, Hermione added. Fair enough, Harry said. Now on to Hufflepuff. Hermione was wrong. Harry did not, in fact, get the chance to write down his memories of his experience in the graveyard that night. Hufflepuff House's first night for first years was the first time that Harry really understood Professor McGonagall's words that your house will be your family. Harry, Ron, Neville, and Hermione, along with their fellow first years, were all smothered in affection and support by the older Puffs as they experienced their first night in a new place. Had he experienced this back when he was 11, Harry thought, he would have really been able to appreciate the supportive community that was the Hufflepuff basements. Now, however, the Hufflepuff experience felt stifling. Still, Harry managed to put most of his thoughts on the graveyard onto parchment, while Ron and Neville ran interference for him, stashing it in his trunk to be reviewed at a later date. Afterward, Harry relaxed and simply let himself enjoy the Hufflepuff first-year experience. He latched himself onto Cedric Diggory like a limpet, and the older boy seemed more endeared than annoyed by it. When the third year brought up McGonagall's animagus transformation, Harry used it as an excuse to check his and his friends' pets, revealing Pettigrew once again and setting his godfather on the track to freedom. By the time Halloween came around, though, Harry was getting restless. He and his friends hadn't really had the chance to separate from their house and practice on their own, and Harry knew that he had to get his dueling back up to par if he was to face Voldemort again in 4 years, not to mention rebuilding the physical condition he'd achieved through his training for the Triwizard Tournament. At least when he mentioned his grief over his parents' deaths on Halloween, the Hufflepuff prefects fully supported his closest friends, choosing to skip the feast in order to comfort him. This gave Harry the change, take out the troll Quirrell let in, finally releasing some of his pent-up aggression on the powerful but unintelligent creature. After that, Harry and his friends used the excuse of self-defense practice to slip away from their house and practice their magic. Sometimes their housemates would come with them, and they would have to limit their abilities to what a well-read first year could achieve. But when they were alone, they let loose. "I can't wait to have access to the chamber again," Harry said, as he panted on the ground after a 2-on-1 fight against Ron and Hermione. He had lost, but it was close. We were really able to go all out in there. With that said, Harry picked himself up off the floor and transfigured a sword to fight Neville. Those non-magical fighting skills had saved him so many times during the tournament that Harry refused to let them atrophy. "You're no stranger to hard work," the Hat had said to him. "None of your friends are, and your loyalty to each other is absolute. I agree that all of you will do well in Hufflepuff." Hermione invited him and ran to her home for Christmas as always. And as always, Harry got to enjoy a true familial holiday with the dentist family. The three of them used the opportunity to distress after the always stressful months under Quirrellmort's watchful eyes, and to pursue a research project that required access to the Muggle world. They spent their holiday in London's public library, trawling through Muggle newspaper archives to find out everything they could about the town of Little Hangleton. They found references to the murder of the Riddle family in 1943. The newspaper story said that they died of fright, also known as the killing curse, confirming Voldemort's claim of having murdered his own father. Searching even further back, the trio found a 1925 wedding announcement for the marriage of Tom Riddle and Merope Gaunt. The latter name was one that they recognized from their genealogical research, the last daughter of the Gaunt family, one of the Sacred 28, whose members notably included Merope's father Marvolo, who were rumored to have claimed descent from Salazar Slytherin, and whose ancestral home was in the town of Little Hangleton. These facts had led the time-traveling quartet to suspect that Voldemort's pureblood mother that Dumbledore had mentioned once was in fact a Gaunt, and this wedding announcement only confirmed it. "There's a Muggle saying," Hermione pondered aloud as they were walking back from the library on the last day of their break. "Know the enemy and know yourself, and in 100 battles you will never be defeated." Well, we know our enemy now. "Still, we should check out Little Hangleton in the summer," Harry said. "If nothing else, we can sabotage the bone of the father," added Ron. On the train ride back to Hogwarts, the three friends filled in their fourth Neville on what they'd discovered. "House of the Hard-Working indeed," he said approvingly as they finished summarizing their findings. "I can't believe you were able to find out all of that in just a few weeks." "It was a lot of work," Ron admitted, "but worth it if we can solve the Voldemort problem once and for all." "And," Harry said, "there's a good chance that there's a Horcrux in Little Hangleton." "Really?" Hermione asked excitedly. "Are you serious?" "No, that's my godfather," Harry punned. "But think about it. He clearly considers it to be a place of importance, the murder of his father's family, one of the defining events of his life. Wouldn't he keep a piece of his soul there?" "We'll look then," Neville concluded. "Maybe bring Luna along, since she can sense them. But the dam trace is still going to be a problem if this hypothetical Horcrux has any defenses at all." "Darby," Hermione said simply, causing the elf to pop in. The loyal servant was always extremely helpful and eager to please. "If we asked you to, could you get past magical protections to retrieve a cursed object?" "If there is not being wards against elves, and Master Harry is asking, Darby can be doing," the elf said proudly. "That's good, Darby," Harry said to his bonded servant. "One day this summer, we might need you to do just that." The elf nodded before popping away. The spring of that year went by like always, with the retrieval of one philosopher's stone, the smuggling out of one Norwegian ridgeback dragon hatchling, and a long night after exams waiting for Voldemort to flee the castle in defeat. And soon enough, the time-traveling quartet were on the Hogwarts Express once again back to London, with plans for a critical summertime adventure. Using Hedwig and Darby to coordinate, the five friends organized the outing to take place on the 28th of July, just before Harry and Neville would turn 12. Neville and Ron claimed they were visiting Hermione. Hermione claimed she was visiting Ron. Harry just told the Dursleys he was leaving, and if they protested, he would tell Sirius. And they all relied on the hope that the Grangers couldn't contact the Weasleys or Longbottoms easily, and vice versa. Darby popped them over one by one to a secluded spot in the town of Little Hangleton. They mostly kept to the shadows, knowing that 4 preteen strangers lurking around a small town would draw a lot of unwanted attention. First, they visited the Riddle House. The abandoned Muggle Manor was a place that Harry recognized from his vision at the start of his 4th year, as was the future murder victim, the manor's caretaker, who nearly spotted them and forced them to hide and flee the building. Next, they stopped by Little Hangleton's graveyard, which was thankfully devoid of any mourners. In the daylight, Harry had trouble matching what he was seeing with his memories of the same cemetery at night, but ultimately he found the spot where the Portkey had landed and where Cedric had died. Shedding a tear for his fellow champion and fellow Hufflepuff, Harry turned to locate where Voldemort's father was buried. Tom Riddle, 1905-1943. "I am sorry for this, sir," Harry said to the bones of the murdered man, "but as I think even you would agree, your son must be stopped, which means doing this, Darby." Hermione pulled out a package, a complete skeleton that, back at Hogwarts, they had transfigured out of wood and then shrunken. "Please switch this for Tom Riddle's real bones." Darby nodded, and with a wave of his hands, a burst of elven magic, the transfigured skeleton was enlarged and then replaced by a far more real-looking set of bones, ones that still had a few pieces of decaying fabric hanging off of them. Though grave robbing and desecration of the dead disgusted him, Harry had no choice but to sabotage Voldemort's return for his sake, for Cedric's sake, for all their sakes. "Send this to somewhere safe and hidden. Somewhere we can retrieve it to be destroyed once school starts." "Yes, Master Harry," Darby said, his voice devoid of his usual enthusiasm for even the excitable house. Elf understood the solemnity of the occasion. "What next?" Hermione asked once Tom Riddle Sr.'s skeleton had vanished. "There wasn't any Horcrux in the Riddle home," Luna said, "or here." "Which leaves the Gaunt family home," Neville said. "We need to find it first," said Ron. Unfortunately, by the time that the summer sun was approaching the horizon, the wizards, witches, and elf still hadn't managed to locate any wizarding dwellings on the outskirts of the village, which was annoying. They each got popped away by Darby to their own homes, promising each other that they would continue their search for the Gaunt shack on a future date. It was Hermione who hit upon the solution in the end, but Harry who ended up implementing it. If exploring the village on foot wasn't working, then an aerial search might just do. So after he finished his chores from the Dursleys, Harry had Darby pop him, along with a Nimbus 2001 that Sirius had bought him as a birthday gift and his invisibility cloak, back to Little Hangleton. Harry spent 2 weeks performing a grid search pattern over the village before his keen snitch-finding eye spotted it, a small house surrounded by a thicket of trees. It was hardly as grand as Longbottom Manor or as whimsical as the Burrow, but when Harry tried to approach it, his mind was assaulted with an unnatural sense of fear. The shack, for no other word ought to have been sullied by being applied to such a pitiful dwelling, was magically protected. He'd found it. On their last weekend before Hogwarts resumed, the 5 friends were popped over to examine the shack for themselves. "That's the ancestral home of the ancient House of Gaunt," Neville asked incredulously. "That? We all can feel the outer layer of the wards on it," Ron said. "I know, but it's the last descendants of one of the founders, and they lived in such a hovel." "1,000 years is a long time," Hermione pointed out, "and we knew that the Gaunt family had gone downhill." "There's something bad in there," Luna interrupted shakily. "Something wrong." "A Horcrux?" Harry asked his friend. Calling her his girlfriend seemed weird now that he was 11 and she 10, as a still small, childlike hand grasped his. "I'm almost certain," she affirmed. "Well then," Harry said. "Darby, there's a cursed artifact, a Horcrux, like the diary and the locket and the diadem, all of which you've been near inside this house. I order you to retrieve it and bring it to us. But be very careful. I don't want any chance of you getting hurt." The house, Elf popped away, and 5 minutes later popped back while levitating a golden ring box over his hands. "It's in there," Luna confirmed. Darby set the ring box down on the ground before stepping back. "Are you wanting Darby to open the bad magic box, Harry Potter, sir?" "Yes, please, Darby." With a flick of his elven fingers, the ring box opened, and Harry saw it, the most beautiful ring he'd ever seen. It was a simple golden band set with the most mesmerizing stone, one carved with an interesting triangular sigil. He knew that if he put it on, it would give him the chance to see his parents again, to see Cedric again. Ignoring the inconsequential tugging on his hand, he stepped forward and reached down to pick the ring up. Who was calling his name? And why? Surely they, too, saw the importance of this ring, and he wouldn't mind sharing with his friends once he'd had his turn. "Harry, mate, you need to snap out of it." He let go of the annoying hand that was desperately grasping at his as he reached out to pick it up. "Darby, you have to help him, save him." Just as he was about to touch his prize, a force blasted him backward, and he landed onto the hard ground. At first he saw stars, and then, when his vision cleared, the blue, partly clouded sky and the bright morning sun. When he regained his bearings, he realized what had happened. "The Horcrux got me, didn't it?" he groaned as he sat himself up. "It did," Hermione confirmed. Darby rushed over to fuss over him. "Darby is being so sorry, but Master Harry is being taken by the bad magics, and Darby is having to stop him, and Darby must be punishing himself." "Don't, Darby," Harry said firmly, but with a kind smile. "You did exactly the right thing. You've always protected me, you know, even from myself. Now, if you could close that ring box back up and send it to the same place you put Tom Riddle's skeleton, it will be safe until we kill the basilisk and can destroy it." Darby nodded in understanding before waving his hand and doing just that. Meanwhile, Neville helped Harry up off the ground, and Luna gave him a huge hug. With their goal achieved, the friends said their temporary goodbyes. "You know, Luna," he said quietly, as Darby began popping his friends away, "I envy you sometimes, being able to ignore those stupid, horrible things entirely." "And I envy you, Harry," she said, "being able to learn and grow through the loops. You're an amazing friend to all of us, Luna, and especially to me. I hope you're able to keep that much across the resets." Luna nodded and smiled as Darby came to pop her back to her home, the rookery. "Wait, Darby," she said. "There's one more thing I need to tell you, Harry, about the ring." "What about it?" "Well, not the ring itself, but the stone that was set in it. It's not just some jewel with a family crest. If I'm right, it's something far more powerful. Have you ever read The Tale of Three Brothers?" "I think I may have heard it once. One of the prefects was reading Tales of Beedle, the bard before lights out for a few of my homesick classmates. It's about three brothers challenging death, right? And earning cursed prizes, the Deathly Hallows." Luna picked up a nearby stick and began drawing in the dirt. A line, the unbeatable Elder Wand, a circle, the Resurrection Stone, and a triangle, and the true cloak of invisibility. "That's the weird symbol that was on the ring's stone," Harry realized as he examined the girl's drawing. "It's the symbol of the Hallows, and of the Peverell brothers who won them, and of those wizards and witches who believe that they are more than fairy tale or fable, and who search for them." "Wait a minute," Harry protested. "You can't be implying—" "I am, Harry. The stone in the Horcrux is none other than the Resurrection Stone itself." Chapter 24. Mother Knows Best. The Resurrection Stone. Since Luna had told him that it was within their reach, Harry had hardly thought of anything else. In every loop, Harry saw his parents' faces in the mirror of Erest as he acquired the Philosopher's Stone from the mirror, and in every loop his grief for them was renewed. In some ways, yes, he was an adult, but in others he was still a 12-year-old orphan who yearned for his parents. His friends knew him well enough to see that he was distracted, and Luna, who had, to Harry's great joy, joined them in the House of Badgers, had been able to deduce and reveal what was bothering him. Knowing that Harry needed the resolution of using the stone, should it be real, the time-looping quintet turned their attention to the task of killing Slytherin's basilisk for the third time. The attack went off without a hitch, at least insofar as fighting an ancient and powerful basilisk could ever be a smooth endeavor. Hedwig, clad in new and improved owl armor, was easily able to get both of the snake's eyes within the first minute of fighting, and Hermione was able to hold the basilisk in place with a flame whip, while Ron and Neville forced its jaw open, and Harry went for the kill. Easier every time, Ron cheered as the quartet celebrated once again defeating the basilisk. He swept up Hermione into his arms and gave her a massive hug, which she eagerly reciprocated, and a kiss on the cheek. "Don't get cocky now," Neville warned him lightly, but Ron hardly paid attention. No matter how many times they did it, taking down a millennium-old murder serpent was an incredible accomplishment, and the euphoria they got from achieving it lasted for weeks. "Darby," Harry called. "Bring along the book and the ring, please, and Luna too, just to be sure." A minute or so, Darby popped in with everything Harry had requested: the ring box containing the cursed treasure of the Gaunt Shack, the diary of Tom Riddle that Ron had once again retrieved from his sister's things before she could write in it, and their friend who hadn't participated in the battle directly. Luna put on a pair of dragon-hide gloves, grasped a basilisk fang that Harry had torn out of the dead snake's mouth, and utterly ignoring the Horcrux's seductive nature, efficiently thrust the fang first into the cover diary and then into the band of the gaunt ring. The two soul containers let out twin wraith-like images and a pair of nearly identical ear-splitting screams, indicating that the soul anchors had been successfully unanchored. "Sometimes it seems almost too simple nowadays," Harry mused as he beheld the ruined diary and the twisted ring. The latter's stone, as predicted by Luna, remained entirely intact and free of the Horcrux's corruption. "You'd remember that you nearly got yourself taken over or cursed, or whatever nasty fate that Voldemort had planned, by that ring a few months ago, right?" Hermione asked. "I do remember that," Harry assured her, "but you were all there to pull me back, to keep me grounded, just as I know you always will be." "Yes, we will," Neville agreed. Meanwhile, Luna had reached into the box and was working the gaunt ring's dark stone out of its setting. Soon enough, she got it and held it up triumphantly. "Ha!" she exclaimed. "We have it, the stone." "You really think that this stone is the same one as in the fairy tale, Luna?" Hermione asked skeptically. Luna had told them all about the tale of three brothers and the questers and the legend of the Master of Death, just as she told Harry, and of them all, Hermione was the one who believed the story the least. "I do," Luna whispered, turning the maybe resurrection stone absently in her hands. Harry came up to stand next to her, wrapping his arm around her comfortingly. Of all of them, he understood her grief best, having lost his mother just like her. "Mummy," she muttered under her breath. "Are you sure you want to do that?" Neville asked cautiously. "I mean, if this is the resurrection stone of the legend, it's something which oughtn't be used." "I know," Luna said sadly, "but I have to see her, just once." Harry withdrew from his friend, standing to the side in respect for the solemnity of this moment. Luna straightened herself and turned the stone thrice in her hand, saying a single name: "Pandora Lovegood." And even though Harry was hoping for it, he could hardly believe his eyes when a wispy shade of a woman who looked very much like Luna, but fully grown, appeared in the dimly lit chamber before them. "Hello, my little moonbeam," Luna's mother said. "Hello, Mummy," Luna returned, tears of grief flowing from her right eye and of joy from her left. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville stood back and watched, but did not listen or intrude on Luna's moment with her mother. For 20 minutes, an orphan and the mother she had lost all too soon. When those 20 minutes had passed, Harry gently approached Luna and tapped her on her arm. Luna turned to him with the most pitiful, hurt look he had ever seen on her face, but he merely gave her a sad shake of the head. "Your friend is right," the shade of Pandora Lovegood said. "It is not good for a shade to linger among the living for too long, nor for the living to linger among the dead." "I understand, Mummy," Luna said, blatantly reluctant. "You can call me again, my moonbeam, but not too often." Luna nodded sadly and let the stone fall to the Chamber of Secrets' dusty floor. Harry held her in comfort for a long while, their friends joining in, but eventually the presence of the stone pulled at him. He had seen how it had affected so much grief in Luna, but he couldn't refuse it. He couldn't notice it, not when he had spent so long yearning for it and anticipating it. Whom to call first, he wondered as he picked up the resurrection stone for himself. His father James, or his mother Lily. In all his time living with Sirius and Remus, with Padfoot and Moony, he'd heard plenty of tales of his father's childhood and young adulthood, his escapades and his triumphs, and even a few of his failures, though Sirius and Remus remained markedly biased in avoiding discussions of the latter. But of his mother, he knew little, only that Severus Snape claimed to act in her memory, though he clearly did not show it in his actions toward Harry. And so he had no choice in which name he spoke, as he turned the resurrection stone over once, twice, thrice. "Lily Potter," he called. The figure that formed in front of him was familiar and alien, familiar in her red hair, in the green eyes that he and she shared, even in some of the facial features that he could recognize as her having in common with Aunt Petunia. He had seen that face in photographs and in the mirror of Erist, but not even in the mirror had it seemed so real. This was his mother, dead, an insubstantial shade, he forced himself to remember, but his mother. "Hello, Mum," he greeted shyly with a slight smile. "Hello, Harry, son," she said. "I've been watching over you always. Every year you spent with my hateful sister and her worthless husband." And Harry was glad to hear his mother's vitriol against his childhood tormentors, "and all the time you've spent at Hogwarts. All of the time loops." "What?" Harry exclaimed. You know about them. But how?" Not even the dead had been spared the time for Delius effect, for Pandora Lovegood had not even possessed her daughter's awareness of time's looping, let alone the full memories that Lily Evans Potter seemed to have. "Gather around your friends and conjure yourselves some seats," his mother instructed, "and I'll explain." Harry eagerly beckoned his friends over, conjuring comfortable armchairs and sofas for himself and his friends with a negligent wave of his wand. He even made a tiny chair for Darby and a perch for Hedwig. "Hello, Ron, Hermione, Neville, Luna, and Darby," the shade of Harry's mum greeted. "It's so good to meet all of my son's friends. I've seen how you've supported him through all of the time loops." "Yes, Hermione," his mum said quickly as the witch in question opened her mouth. "I'm aware of the time loops. In fact, I'm inadvertently responsible for them." There was silence as all of Harry's friends tried to process that statement. Even Harry was still working through the implications of what his mum had just told him. "Does that mean," Neville spoke up first, "that you can tell us how to end the loops, Mrs. Potter?" "I mean, Mrs. Potter, we are incredibly grateful for the loops, and they've saved us so many times, but they need to end at some point." "I think I can," Harry's mother said kindly, cutting off Neville's babbling. "And you don't have to worry about offending me. The dead are largely above worrying about such things. Well, most of them are. There are always exceptions, the Malfoys, for instance." Harry and his friends chuckled a little at the thought of long-gone Malfoy patriarchs maintaining their pride in their house name and pureblood lineage, even in the afterlife. "You said that you were responsible for the loops, Mrs. Potter," Hermione asked, ignoring the fact that she had a direct line to information about the afterlife. Lily Potter's shade nodded. You see, Hermione, when I was at Hogwarts, I was quite like you, a Gryffindor, a Muggle-born, and one of the school's brightest students. With the help of the professors, especially Professor Dumbledore and Professor Flitwick, I took my learning above and beyond what the Owl and Newt curriculums had to offer. I delved into old, powerful magics that most wizards and witches are barely aware exist. The magics of love and blood and sacrifice, and the magics of time itself. When I graduated, Harry, I married your father, and we both joined the Order of the Phoenix, Professor Dumbledore's secret organization to oppose Lord Voldemort. Our allies were some of the best wizards and witches of our generation. James's fellow marauders, Neville's parents Frank and Alice, Ron's uncles Fabian and Gideon. Together, the Order did a lot of good, saved a lot of lives, kept Voldemort from utterly taking over. But still, we were losing. Fabian and Gideon Prowett were slaughtered in an attack by 5 Death Eaters. Another of the Order, Edgar Bones, and his whole family were killed, and those were just a few of our losses. James and I together were incredible on the battlefield, even managing to fight off Voldemort himself 3 different times. So, too, did your parents, Neville. And then Professor Dumbledore came and told the 4 of us that a defector had informed him of Voldemort's plans to go after the children of his most successful enemies. I was pregnant at the time, as was Alice, and so we each went into hiding under the Fidelius charm. While in hiding, I didn't remain idle. I didn't fully trust in James's choice of Peter Pettigrew as secret keeper, nor that Voldemort wouldn't be able to find some arcane way to bypass the Fidelius and get to us anyway. I got out my notes on deep magic, and I worked to create the ultimate protection for my son, a way to bind time itself to Harry's defense. And it worked. When Voldemort came for us that fateful Halloween night, he gave me the chance to step aside. But I refused, and I died, and in doing so, the ritual was completed. When Voldemort tried to shoot you with the killing curse, it did not hit you, but instead it reversed its course to strike Voldemort instead. So I'm not the boy who lived after all, Harry said. It was all you, Mum, all along. It was, said his mother, but don't deny how powerful of a symbol of hope you are, Harry. She's right, Ron agreed. All the storybooks, all the legends, as much as you hate it, Harry, you are a boy who lived. There's no changing that. But one day, Harry vowed, when all this is over, I will make the world recognize what you did, Mum, that it was you who stopped him. His mother smiled. I know you will, my baby boy. Harry didn't protest the appellation, basking in the joy of his mother's caring presence, even if they were separated by the veil. Now, she continued her explanation, we reach the events of your first year, Harry, when all of the Hogwarts professor failed to keep Quirrell from the stone, and when you and Ron and Hermione went down to stop him. The protection I gave you was still there, waiting inside you. It is the power of time, combined with my love for you, Harry, and my dying will. I don't know why it didn't just reverse the curse like it had before, but I suspect it was because the protection recognized, somehow, that Voldemort wouldn't be defeated so easily, that he could eventually find a way around it. So it found another way, said Luna. Precisely, dear, Lily Potter said with a smile at the 11-year-old girl. I can only imagine that the protection transformed itself into something more powerful and enduring, that it chose companions for Harry so he wouldn't be alone. Harry thought back to those desperate moments long ago, bound and dying beneath the trapdoor. I remember, he said. I remember thinking about Ron, left behind at the chess game, and Hermione, who had gone back for him, and Neville, whom we'd left petrified in the common room. Maybe it latched onto those dying thoughts. Maybe, his mother agreed, though I suspect we'll never know for sure. Sacrificial magic is incredibly arcane and complicated, so is time magic. That I managed to merge the two together, frankly, was a feat worthy of Merlin or Morgana. In fact, both of them came to compliment me on my success. Harry tried to imagine his mum casually meeting the 2 most famous figures in wizarding history, and it brought a smile to his face, even as it boggled his mind. The nature of your protection, Harry, is not something anyone can fully predict, though I suspect it won't change its form again, not without outside intervention. Ron frowned. Does that mean that we're stuck in this loop forever? He asked. Not necessarily, Lily replied. Once Voldemort is fully dead and the danger is gone, it might dissipate automatically, or we might need to go and convince it that its job is done, though I'm still not entirely sure how the latter option would work. Between you and Hermione, Mrs. Potter, I think we can figure it out, Neville asserted. True, she agreed, but don't count yourselves out, any of you. Even if Hermione is the best of you when it comes to book knowledge, each of you are incredibly brilliant in your own ways, and I'm incredibly happy and proud that Harry has a friend in each one of you. All of Harry's friends blushed at the praise from the long-dead witch, and Harry smiled as well. Spending time with his mother and his best friends, he wished it would never end. That thought suddenly jolted him out of his reverie, and he glanced at his watch. They'd been conversing for almost 20 minutes already. Do you need to go now, Mum? He asked, even though he really didn't want to. I know that the stories say that shades aren't meant to be among the living for so long. You're right, dear, but I've been, granted an exception, you might say. And don't bother asking by whom, I can't tell you. But time's course must continue, and Voldemort must return to death, as all living things do. So long as I'm helping you toward those two goals, I have a bit more leeway. Harry wasn't sure whether to jump for joy or burst into weeping, for he knew he would get the unique privilege of as much time as he wanted with his deceased mother. But one day, on the day when Voldemort will finally be defeated for good, he would have to say goodbye to his mum for good as well. His mother and friends were wisely quiet as he worked through his internal dilemma, but eventually his mum spoke up once more. Now, she said, I've been watching a lot of your journeys and trials, but I haven't seen it all, so tell me everything. The group spent hours narrating everything they'd experienced to Lily Potter, even the events of Loop 8. Harry got to see his mother cheer all of his victories and mourn each and every one of his defeats, and eventually the telling came to an end. So, Lily summarized, you know how to get 4 Horcruxes, but not how many more there are still to be accounted for. Correct, Mrs. Potter, Hermione said with a firm nod. Well, the Shade said, I can give you some help on your Horcrux search. I can talk to Regulus Black to see if he knows about anyone else who might have been entrusted with the location of a Horcrux. There are a few people, other than Voldemort, obviously, who I suspect might know how many Horcruxes he made, though I'll have to check. And I think I know the location of one more Horcrux, though I really hope I'm wrong. Where is it, Mrs. Potter? Ron asked. Lily Potter said nothing, but simply pointed a shaky finger at Harry's scar. Chapter 25. The Secrets of Horace Slughorn. The Chamber of Secrets was utterly silent. Even Hedwig, owl that she was, let out not a hoot nor rustled her feathers, for she understood the horrible importance of the moment. Harry's words came out in a faint whisper, but it might as well have been a yell for how much it stood out to those listening. What do you mean, Mum? I'm a Horcrux. The shade of Lily Evans Potter nodded solemnly as ghostly tears fell from her spectral eyes. I'm sorry, my baby, but it's the only conclusion. Explain, Hermione demanded harshly, willing to defend her best friend even from his own dead mother. The visions, Lily explained mournfully, are the key. Your connection, Harry, to Voldemort's mind is incredible in its strength and scope, and it works even when the two of you are separated by hundreds of miles, even when you are within the walls of Hogwarts, which are imbued with old and powerful spells to keep students safe from being attacked or scryed remotely. I wasn't an expert on mind magic, but I know enough that no simple mental link, especially not one where neither person involved consents to being linked, would work like that, and I suspect that Dumbledore knew it too. The dead witch's face was deeply sorrowful. The third loop, Ron said, snapping his fingers and pointing at Lily's shade. When Dumbledore decided to cut Harry off arbitrarily, he grew angry at the memory. You're saying that he knew Harry was a Horcrux? Lily's insubstantial shoulders shrugged. Maybe, or more likely, he suspected it enough that he wanted to take precautions. Either way, the old man panicked. He failed Harry and you too, Ron, and you had to pay the price. Harry's gift of Parseltongue, which is a bloodline-based gift that neither James nor I had, is another clue. Hermione growled as she turned over the implications of Lily's hypothesis in her mind. It's an interesting theory, Mrs. Potter, she said, but there are a few problems with it. For one, if Harry really is a Horcrux, how could Luna even stand to be around him, given how horrible she finds the other ones? Luna stood up, and with a glance at Harry to get permission, placed her hand on his forehead and screwed her face in concentration. After 2 or so tension-filled minutes later, she released her hand and shook her head sadly. Mrs. Potter is right, she reportedly gravely. There is something bad there, something that's hidden so well behind Harry's pure soul that even I never noticed it. So what can we do about it? Harry demanded. I mean, the only thing I know that can destroy a Horcrux is basilisk venom, and stabbing a fang into my forehead would probably kill me, painfully, and then reset time back to before the Horcrux was destroyed in the first place, so just a lot of pain. Harry let his eyes fall on everyone there, human and otherwise, living and dead. I'm sorry, mate, said Ron when Harry stared at him. I can't think of anything at the moment, but I promise you will find a way. Actually, said Neville, I might just have an idea. Really? Harry asked enthusiastically. You know how to get this thing out of me? Well, the plant-loving boy said, I was thinking about what Mrs. Potter said about how your protection had changed, from deflecting curses to causing the time loop, and how we would need to convince it to change again to end the loop. Somehow, we might be able to convince Mrs. Potter's sacrificial protection that the Horcrux in your head is the biggest threat to you. Hermione gasped. That would be perfect, she exclaimed. The protection might just flat out reverse the Horcrux's destruction. Or seal it away in a time bubble where it can't do anything or any of a number of possible actions, Lily Potter warned. Its effects are, as I said, fundamentally unpredictable. But if this works, said Ron, then it would be getting rid of 2 gnomes with 1 throw. Harry, Hermione, and Lily all raised their eyebrows at the Weasley sons' version of the common Muggle expression. I wasn't saying that it wasn't a good idea, Lily said, just that we'd need to be very careful. Harry stood up and approached the incorporeal figure of his mother. It was good to see you, Mum, he said. So good. It was wonderful to talk to you, my baby boy, Lily agreed, and you should call me again soon. And remember that I love you so much. With that, Harry reluctantly let the resurrection stone drop out of his hands, and with it, the image of Lily Potter vanished into nothingness. Let's go, Ron said, laying a comforting hand on his shoulder as he guided Harry back up toward the entrance of the Chamber of Secrets. We don't want to be missed. And so, the 5 friends, along with Hedwig, trudged back up toward the stairway out of the chamber. Darby, the lucky elf, simply popped out back to the kitchens. Harry tried not to let his status as a Horcrux affect his daily life too much. After all, he tried to reason with himself. If even Luna couldn't tell that something was wrong with him, then surely the shard of his nemesis lodged in his scar hadn't corrupted him or made him evil. He was mostly successful in convincing himself of this, and the support of his friends and his housemates got him the rest of the way. Cedric Diggory, in particular, was very good about cheering his younger housemate up whenever he started getting into a mental down spiral about the thing inside him. For now, Neville's idea to solve the Harry Horcrux and time loop problems was put to the side, as they first had to deal with answering the most important question of all. How many Horcruxes had Voldemort made? Luna's first idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Simply use the resurrection stone to call upon the shades of everyone who had ever been killed to make one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, and count the number of shades who appeared. Unfortunately, Luna's idea also failed, since the resurrection stone was apparently not equipped to do conditional searches like that, with the call failing to summon anyone at all. The second concept was equally simple, but far more dangerous. If Voldemort himself counted as dead, then they could use the stone to summon his currently disembodied wraith and interrogate him about his Horcrux count, relying on the fact that anything summoned by the resurrection stone could be compelled into honesty by the stone's wielder. After that, they would immediately reset the loop for safety's sake. Unfortunately for them, or perhaps fortunately for them, depending on your point of view, this idea didn't work either. This meant that they were stuck with doing some good, old-fashioned detective work. Lily was doing some investigating among the dead to see if any of them knew about Tom Riddle's plans to make Horcruxes. But when the last week of October came around with no new information, they were forced to conclude that if there were answers to be found, they would be found among the living. And with one particular living person in particular. This, Hermione said, as she gestured to a full-page photo of a smiling, jovial, heavy-set man in a book called Great Potioneers of the Modern Age, is our target. Potions Master Horace Slughorn, ex-professor of potions at Hogwarts, Professor Snape's immediate predecessor in both that role and the role of Slytherin head of house. He taught potions for a long time, not just to all of your parents, but even to Tom Riddle's generation. He was Riddle's head of house, and according to Mrs. Potter, liked to play favorites. The whole group of time travelers was sitting around a secluded table in the corner of the Hogwarts library, scrutinizing the photo as if to divine some deep understanding of the wizard it portrayed. And we've read up enough about Tom Riddle's school days to know that he would have been one of Slughorn's favorites, Harry continued. He was charismatic and charming, a leader in Slytherin House and the school at large, prefect, award for special services, head boy, etc. My mum thinks that if Tom Riddle had ever confided in any of his mentors about his plans for immortality, it would have been Horace Slughorn. Neville frowned at the moving photograph. Was this Slughorn character ever a Death Eater? As far as we know, no, Hermione answered. He was a bit of a blood purist, says Mrs. Potter, but was still willing to mentor her once he realized her intelligence, and he remained a member of the Hogwarts staff until the war's end. The plan, as far as there is one, is fairly simple, said Ron. The location of Horace Slughorn's home is well known enough, since he likes to spend his retirement entertaining his former students, creating connections and trading favors. It's said that the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest on Halloween, or Samhain as it's called in the old traditions. Harry and Darby will sneak into Slughorn's house under Harry's cloak, where they'll call on Mrs. Potter and have her shade grill him for information. She was supposedly one of his favorite students, and he might be more willing to speak to the dead than to the living, especially on such a sensitive matter. And if he knows nothing, Neville asked. Then it's back to the drawing board, Harry said. But we should always hope for the best, Luna added brightly. Like Voldemort turning into a baby this Stral. Luna's off-handed remark brought the conversation to a screeching halt. I don't always know where your mind is going, Luna, Harry eventually said, but I love it anyway. Luna's radiant smile brought cheer to all of their faces. It was just past 11 in the evening when Horace Slughorn bid his last guest farewell. His Halloween party had been a smashing success, if you asked him, for he had introduced at 3 pairs of people who he thought would find success together. Not to mention, he'd secured a year's supply of candied pineapple from his favorite supplier. The little things in life, after all, were sometimes the most important. He was about to draw himself a warm bath in preparation for bed when he felt a chill wind blow through the room. Horace knew that he had closed all his windows and doors, so where had the gust of air come from? Who's there? He called out a bit nervously. Show yourself. For a moment, he felt silly for saying such a thing into thin air. He was getting as paranoid as old Mad-Eye Moody. He was. Now that was a kid whom he was glad to have helped on his way to the Auror Academy. He mused, because Alistair would probably come defend his old teacher Slughorn if Horace were ever in danger. Well, once he'd been confirmed as not being a polyjuiced impostor, or a metamorph magus, or a secret Death Eater informant, Horace was cut off from his musing by a familiar female voice, one which he could not forget, and yet could not possibly be speaking to him. Not here, not now. "Hello, Professor," said Lily Evans Potter, one of his favorite students, one of the last of his students to have perished in the war. "Miss Evans," he said nervously as he turned around to face the insubstantial image of the red-haired young woman. "You can't, you aren't, you couldn't possibly be, you're dead." "I am dead," the image of the Muggle-born girl said, "but tonight is Halloween, All Hallows' Eve, Samhain." "The Night of the Dead," Horace whispered to himself. "I've heard the tales, the rumors, but—" "Not all of the old tales are mere myths, Professor," she said lightly. "Tonight, for one night, I can cross back over." "And you came to see me," Horace wondered. Why him? For all that he valued his connections to his former students, why would she choose to haunt them? Why not see your son? "I watch over my son always, but there are things I need to know, Horace Slughorn," she said, a bit eerily in his opinion. "Things that only you can tell me. Things about Tom Riddle, about his Horcruxes." Horace stumbled back. How could Lily know such things? He had almost managed to suppress that horrible conversation, the things that he had let slip to Tom Riddle who had been so bright, so charming, so full of life and magic and potential despite his troubled beginnings. But the dead, it is said, see all, know all, and the shade of Lily Potter had come to render judgment upon him for what he had done, for the secrets of dark magic he had let slip. "I'm sorry," he babbled, tears flowing from his eyes down his full face. "I'm so sorry." "I don't need your tears, Professor," Lily reprimanded, "only to know what you told him, and what he told you." "I told him the basics, Lily, just the basic theory that it involved a split soul. I warned him that death would be preferable, that it was madness, an abomination." "And what did he tell you?" Lily demanded. He wanted to know if it was possible to make more than one, to make 6 for a 7-part soul. It was all theory, of course, just idle talk about things that would never be done in real life. Only then he vanished and returned as he, who must not be named, and I knew that I had given a monster the key to becoming worse. "Forgive me, Lily, please forgive me." "I cannot forgive you," the departed witch said, "for your crime is deep and not mine to forgive. But that you were willing to speak of it, if only to me, might absolve you a little." The clocks chimed midnight, the day ended, and Lily Evans Potter faded into mist. Horace pinched himself. He desperately hoped that it was merely a dream, a product of his troubled conscience, but he knew in his heart that it was real. Real or not, though, this was a wake-up call. Tomorrow, he resolved, he would start trying to do some good in the world, for Lily's sake and for the sake of her still surviving son. In a corner of the room, a preteen wizard and a house elf smiled in satisfaction at the information they'd gotten. They waited for Slughorn to leave the room before departing in a faint pop. "So the number is 6, Harry declared in the Chamber of Secrets the next day. "The diary, locket, diadem, and ring that we've already retrieved in one timeline or another, plus 2 more unknowns." "Could the one in your scar be one of the 2? Ron wondered. "I don't think so," Lily Potter said, once again projected into the land of the living by the resurrection stone. "It's certainly not an intentional Horcrux, nor even a properly made one. I doubt Voldemort would have been aware of its creation, given that he was busy dying at the time. So 2 more Horcruxes, and Harry's scar, and of course, the main living fragment of Voldemort," Hermione summarized. "Which leads to the question, where are the last 2 Horcruxes located?" "Well," Harry reasoned, "of the 4 we've located so far, 2 were hidden with the help of trusted Death Eaters, Lucius Malfoy and Regulus Black, and 2 were placed in locations of importance to Voldemort, Hogwarts, and his maternal family's home. Of those options, Neville reasoned, we have to hope that Death Eaters were entrusted to the locations of the last two Horcruxes. Otherwise, the only one who knows anything about them would be Voldemort, and I doubt he'll say anything. And the Death Eaters will, Ron asked, unless you think we can convince them to give up information to a bunch of children. There are always truth serums, Luna said airily, and disguises and tricks. Fair enough, said Hermione. There's just one more problem. All of the most loyal Death Eaters are either safe behind the protections of old pureblood manors, or worse, in Azkaban. Everyone there, except Luna and Mrs. Potter, shuddered at the mention of the home of the Dementors. I don't want to go anywhere near Dementors again, Neville said vehemently. Nobody does, Ron agreed, but if it's the only way, we're veto. And to make matters worse, we'll have to do the whole thing without our wands, Hermione pointed out. The trace will get us for any magic we do outside of Hogwarts. We could just abandon the loop once we finish up with Azkaban, Harry offered. I hate that you discuss your own death so casually, his mother said, even if I understand why. Just remember that you won't be able to do so forever. Merlin willing, Neville said, and I don't particularly want to give up on this loop. Well, unless we can all learn how to cast wandless Patronus charms, that's really our only option. Actually, Mrs. Potter said, that's not the worst idea. Harry turned to his mum in surprise. Wandless magic, really? I thought it was really hard and took years to learn. Hard, yes, Harry, but not impossible, she said. Besides, haven't you and your friends been doing hard and impossible things for your age for years now? You really think we can learn wandless magic, Mrs. Potter? Ron asked. Well enough to get in and out of Azkaban. With me teaching you, I do believe you can, she said with a small smile. Even Luna. The living witches and wizards exchanged a series of glances before coming to a firm decision. It's been ages since we've gotten to really expand our magic, Neville declared. So, Professor Potter, when can we start our lessons? Chapter 26, Wandless Wizardry. Wandless magic, despite the rumors, is not something that only old, Merlin-level wizards can accomplish, Lily Potter lectured to the enraptured class of 5 students. They were not in the Chamber of Secrets, but in a small classroom in the basements near Hufflepuff, which the time travelers had warded to keep it from prying eyes. Many children are capable of it. Tom Riddle, actually, was able to do some serious wandless magic before he even knew that magic existed. I was also capable of some wandless skills, though not to the same extent as the young Dark Lord, back when I was a child, and the only other magical people I knew were Severus and his mother Eileen. I suspect that had my Lavella sister, Lily sneered, not done her very best to make you fear your powers, that you would have managed some childhood wandless abilities of your own, Harry. Wandless magic isn't about power or spell knowledge. In fact, there aren't even wandless spells, not really. Wandless magic is nothing less than the process of exerting your will on the world through raw magical power. For the 4 of you who have lived more than a decade with adolescent cores, for whom your soul and mind and magic are more real and permanent than your bodies, I suspect that you'll find it easier than most to let your magic loose in the ways that wandless magic requires. Luna raised her hand. Yes, Luna dear, Mrs. Potter called on her kindly. What about me? Well, Luna, you have some divinatory abilities, and you see the world in a very unique way, in a way that makes me suspect you'll be able to make the mental leap required for wandless magic, learning it and relearning it with ease. Hermione was the next to raise her hand. If wandless magic doesn't have spells, she asked, then how are we going to defend ourselves from the Dementors since we can't cast a Patronus? You may not be able to cast a Patronus, Lily said, but you will be able to duplicate its effects, imbuing pure happiness and love into your magic, forming it into a shield or an animal guardian or any other shape you wish. In that case, how do we get started? Harry asked. It's simple, said his mother. First, conjure yourselves some pebbles with your wands. The time travelers followed her instructions, and each one had a small, round pebble sitting in front of them. Now levitate the pebbles with your wands, Lily instructed, and close your eyes, focusing on how your magic flows from you through your wand and acts upon the pebble. Harry shut his eyelids and did as his mother instructed, trying to visualize the flow of his magic, but it wasn't easy. Even with how he had become extremely sensitive to his magical core during the Triwizard Tournament's binding contract fiasco, Harry was having trouble getting a handle on this exercise. Wandless magic was extraordinarily difficult, after all, so Harry resigned himself to spending a whole lot of time sitting and meditating. How long is this going to take? Ron asked, giving word to what Harry and likely all of them were thinking. Quite a while, Harry's mother said sharply, but not unkindly. Wands make things easier, and you're not going to be learning this in a day or a week or even a month. Ron let out a groan of frustration, but reclosed his eyes to focus on his magic once again, and Harry did likewise. Just before winter break, Hermione managed to complete her essay on how Gilderoy Lockhart was not just an incompetent teacher and a self-aggrandizing egomaniac, but flat out a fraud and a liar, again. While Harry spent his first Christmas with Sirius, again, and helped him and Creature reach an understanding by convincing the elf to reveal the story of Regulus Black and give Harry the Horcrux locket, Hermione's work circulated through Wizarding Society. By the time they got on the train back to Hogwarts, Thedley Prophet had picked up the story, with the future bane of their existence, Rita Skeeter, turning her muckraking skills to smearing the name of their so-called defense professor. Professor Lockhart looked like he wanted to strangle Hermione or obliviate her back to infancy, but the solidarity of Hufflepuffs served them well as a shield from the fraud's anger. There was strength in numbers, after all, and in Hufflepuff, one couldn't help but learn to appreciate that. Toward the end of January, Lily Potter finally moved on in their wandless magic lessons from meditation exercises, but their next task was no less frustrating. You've spent the past few months learning how your magic works to levitate a pebble, she said. Now, you must teach your magic to act in the same way, but without wand or incantation. How long will this step take? Neville wondered aloud. There's good news and bad news, the Shade answered. The bad news is that this could take months, possibly to the end of the school year or beyond. Then what's the good news? Harry asked. The good news is that once you make the wandless magic breakthrough on a single task, once your magic has learned how to act without the aid of a wand, you'll be able to learn other forms of wandless magic more easily. But for now, put your wands away and get your pebbles. The second half of the school year was thus devoted largely to sitting, staring at a pebble, trying to get it to lift off the ground. Thake knew it was possible. Wandless magic was well enough attested in history, and Lily Potter was sure they were capable of it. They even knew how their magic was supposed to be working on the pebble after months of meditating on that singular thing. But the actual achievement of getting the pebble to move took a while. Of course, that wasn't all the time loopers did. They did their homework, which was pathetically easy. They helped Luna with her homework, and she was bright enough and possibly possessed enough partial recollections from previous loops that it was hardly a problem. As part of Hufflepuff House, they helped their fellow Badgers with their homework, which proved to be rewarding. Teaching, after all, is said to be the best way to reinforce one's own learning, and it felt good to see their classmates succeed thanks to them. Through doing this, Harry realized, they had achieved something which he had thought lost to them for years: real, meaningful connections with their peers. They couldn't tell the other students the full truth, of course, nor involve them in their quest to learn wandless magic, destroy the Horcruxes, and defeat Voldemort, but they were able to make friends. Being a Hufflepuff was good for them in that way. No Badgers were allowed to isolate themselves from the house as a whole, and being part of such a collective, well, it felt good. really good. Through January and early February, the investigation into Lockhart continued. After his Valentine's Day fiasco, the other professors had enough with him and convinced him to leave. A day after that, the first story of Lockhart's criminal use of memory charms broke on the front page of The Prophet, with the popinjay being arrested a week later. Their defense lessons for the remainder of the year were taught by a rota of staff that included Professors Snape, Flitwick, and even Dumbledore. Just before Easter break, Harry willed his magic out of him, willed it to take the pebble in front of him and lift it into the air. They had all managed to make the pebble shake and wobble from time to time, but for the very first time out of any of them, Harry's pebble shot upward a few centimeters and hovered there. Harry let out a whoop of excitement, upon which the pebble promptly clattered to the floor, his concentration on the wandless magic being lost. But he had done it. "Congratulations, Harry," his mum said to him with a smile. "You did it, my son, you did it." There was no more wandless magic that day, for all of his friends surrounded him with affection and cheer. The rest of Hufflepuff could tell that their most reclusive members were happy about something, even if they refused to share what, and so they got into the festive mood. It was a good day. The next day, Harry tried to duplicate his previous feat. At first he failed, but after a dozen or so tries, he was able to replicate the exact combination of thought, willpower, and magic that led to the pebble hovering above the table, for about 10 seconds this time. After spending the week of Easter break practicing at every available opportunity, he was able to perform wandless levitation in about 2/3 of his attempts, far from the perfect consistency that his mother had demanded before she would move on to the next step of teaching him wandless magic, but still amazing progress. And Harry wasn't the only one to make progress over Easter break. Luna returned from the rookery with the ability to levitate her pebble, albeit only one try in every 5. With 2 of their friends successful, Ron, Neville, and Hermione all knew that wandless magic was very much possible for them, and they pushed themselves to make their own breakthroughs. A week later, Neville was next, and a week and a half after that, Ron and Hermione levitated their pebbles within hours of each other. Ron got his first, a fact with which he teased Hermione to no end. While the time travelers easily passed their end-of-year exams and received their summer homework, to be completed in the day or two before the Hogwarts Express took them back to London, they also got ethereal summer homework from the only professor who was teaching them something new. All of them had managed to get their pebble levitation to the point where they could raise and lower it without fail. Oddly enough, while her mental rigidity made Hermione the last of the 5 to complete her breakthrough, she was able to go from her first wandless casting to consistent casting within 3 days, far faster than any of her friends. "In the past year," Lily's shade said with a smile, "you have made a lot of progress. By meditating with your wand, you have come to understand that your magic is inside you, and that one's wand only helps to shape magic. By levitating your pebble even once, you learn that wandless magic is possible for you. And by continuing to train your levitation, you have taught yourself how to release your magic wandlessly just as easily and instinctually as with a wand. There's one more mental breakthrough that you must make now, and for you, it should be the easiest. With wand magic, we have dozens of spells to make objects move. Levitating and rotating and hovering and summoning and banishing, etc. Skilled wizards and witches like you will eventually blur the lines between all of these as they begin to use magic in their daily lives. But as I've told you before, wandless magic has no spells at all, only using your magic, your will, and your imagination to reshape the world. You've already made your pebble move up and down. Now, you must make it move in any direction, any pattern you will it to. Up, down, left, right, in circles, spinning end over end. Make it move like it's an extension of your body, and then do the same for larger objects. And that was how Harry spent his summer, taking his pebble, along with other sundry objects he found around Grimmauld Place, and having them flying around him in intricate patterns. Of course, he made sure to have plenty of fun with Sirius and Remus and to visit his friends. He and Ron played a game of normal muggle chess where they moved the pieces with wandless magic. He slept over at Hermione's house and read some of her favorite books, flipping pages not with their hands but with their thoughts. He visited Longbottom Manor and helped Neville carefully dig up and repot plants in his greenhouse without a trowel or shovel. And he spent time with Luna at her oddly shaped home, playing whimsical games of levitating colorful objects to make intricate, whimsical, beautiful patterns. Luna may have been far, far less powerful than any of his other friends, but that didn't stop her from being equally skilled in wandless magic. The traditional first-year charms final of making a pineapple tap dance was a trivial wandless task for Luna by the summer's end, and Harry knew that she would be able to advance her spellcasting, both wanded and wandless, with the help of 4 very dedicated tutors. One very surprising addition to Harry's summer came a week or so after school let out, with the unexpected arrival of a man that he had only seen once and never officially met. "Harry," Sirius said, "let me introduce you to my old potions professor, Horace Slughorn." "It's nice to meet you, sir," Harry said, as he held out his hand to shake the old wizard's proffered one. Outside, he was portraying a curious young man, but inside, he was barely understanding what was going on. Had he figured out he'd been tricked on Halloween? Had the encounter with his mother's spirit caused a change in his behavior? "It is wonderful to meet you as well, Harry," Slughorn said with a smile, which Harry returned. "Your mother was one of my favorite students, and I realized recently that I'd never had a chance to meet your son." "I know that I haven't been able to tell you much about your mum," Sirius added. "So when Professor Slughorn here offered to come share a few stories of her, I figured you would appreciate it." "Absolutely," Harry said, with a mostly genuine grin. It turned out, in the end, that Slughorn's visit was exactly what he'd claimed. He shared a few stories of his mother's school days, stories that even his mum's shade hadn't told him. The conversation eventually moved on to a discussion of potions, in which Harry impressed the retired teacher with his Newt-level knowledge of potion theory. "You're quite the prodigy in my field, aren't you?" he said with a chuckle. "I suppose I should have expected nothing less from Lily's son." "I wouldn't say prodigy," Harry demurred. "I just enjoy reading and learning as much about magic as I can. I'm nothing special at a cauldron." "A Ravenclaw in Hufflepuff colors," Slughorn joked, which wasn't exactly wrong. Harry was quite glad to have experienced all 4 houses now, for a bit of all of them, even Slytherin, remained inside of him. He said as much to Slughorn, albeit in more general terms. "Don't we all have a bit of every house inside us?" he asked. "Say," said Slughorn, with a gleam of inspiration in his eyes, "would you be amenable to a few tutoring sessions with me? See if we could nurture that knowledge into something more." Harry eagerly accepted, and over the course of the summer, he learned that there was a difference between a good potioneer and a potions master, a certain amount of artistry and intuition that could not be learned from a book, but only by being naturally gifted or taught by a true master like Slughorn. While he wouldn't dare call himself a potions master or try to Brufilix Felicis like Slughorn had shown him once, he came out of the summer before his 3rd year with a far deeper understanding of what was going on in a cauldron. He couldn't wait to share it with his friends. When school resumed for their 3rd year, Harry's mum was fully aware of his and his friends' progress with wandless magic, seeing as Harry had, of course, used the resurrection stone to call on her every week or so throughout the summer. Fully satisfied with their wandless movement spells, which at this point were bordering on flat-out telekinesis, she set them their final task before she would proclaim them masters of wandless magic. "Your wandless levitation and other motion spells are excellent now," she congratulated them, "but those are only a small fraction of the potential of magic. You know how to shape your magic wandlessly. You know how to meditate on a wand spell to understand it. So now, you must learn how to expand your repertoire to entirely new areas. Do you have any recommendations for what spells we should try to make wandless? Hermione asked. I have 7 spells for you to duplicate with wandless magic, Lily answered. Hermione pulled out a notebook to write them down. The basic light charm, lumos, and from that, you will learn to create images and visual illusions. The color change charm, color varia, and the wood to metal transfiguration, from which you will learn to change an object's form and substance. The plant maturity spell, Eater's Herbis, will be an exemplar of diagnostic spells, teaching you how to get feedback from your magic. The stunning spell, Stupefy, to learn how to shape and aim bolts of combat magic wandlessly, and the shield Charm Protego, so you can learn the same for magical shields. And finally, the cheering charm, from which you will learn how to charge your magic with emotion, which you'll need for your Azkaban trip. It was a comprehensive list, with one of nearly every kind of spell Harry could ever remember learning. Making those 7 spells wandless would be a challenge, but one that they would overcome like all of the challenges they'd faced before. Can we help each other with these? Neville asked. Lily had forbidden Harry from sharing how he'd managed to achieve his wandless magic breakthrough, saying it was a deeply personal process that each person had to complete in their own way. Something that worked for one wizard or witch might be useless, or worse, counterproductive for another. Yes, you can, she said. Now that you're all wandless capable, you can start collaborating on how you cast your magic. But remember, this isn't like wand magic, where most of the work is done by the wand movement and incantation. The group split up the spell list. Luna learned Lumos, Harry studied Stupefy and Protego, Hermione took Transfiguration and Color Change. Neville focused on the plant maturity charm, and Ron worked on the cheering charm. Luna was the first to successfully wandless cast her spell in early October, but she struggled to teach any of them how she had done it. Eventually, she managed to verbalize it as pushing out her magic into the world and making it seen. With this hint, her 4 close friends were able to progress with a week or 2 to at least a basic light, while Luna herself started shaping the light into glowing images of her favorite magical creatures, real or imagined. It wasn't the full force of wandless magic that they would need for Azkaban, but it was a start. Chapter 27, The Dementor's Tower. As their 3rd year in Hufflepuff progressed, the time travelers had one goal in mind, and one goal only: to plan and to prepare for their raid on Azkaban. This included, of course, continuing to teach themselves wandless magic. Ron was the next one after Luna to learn his designated spell, and the 5 friends walked around in a perpetually giddy state for most of November as they learned and practiced wandless cheering charms. From there, adapted the magic to induce all sorts of emotions: fear, sadness, and anger, but also humor, hope, and affection. Their final test was to cast the wandless equivalent of Ridiculous, the boggart banishing charm. From there, it was only a matter of practice and time before they could make a wandless equivalent to a patroness. Neville's deep connection to, and affection for, his plants let him make Theater's Herbispell wandless toward the end of November, but Harry and Hermione struggled with their tasks. After all, Transfiguration is the most theoretically intensive branch of magic, and thus the hardest to translate into the instinctive style of casting required by wandless magic. The offensive-defensive magic Harry was trying to learn, on the other hand, was less theoretically challenging, but required him to force his magic into concentrated bolts, streams, and shields. As they returned from their winter break, Harry had a simple realization that he would never be able to make his combat magic wandless without actually going into combat, so he and his friends began to fight. Wand against wand, of course, to keep up their skills, but also wand against wandless, which was almost always a victory for the one with the wand. Wand against 2 wandless users, which was decidedly more even. Wandless against wandless, wand against wandless where the wandless user gets a sword. Also fairly even, especially when it was Neville or Harry using said sword. And so on, and so on. They built up their physical stamina and their magical potency, and all the while, Harry and the others tried to cast Protgone stupefyandlessly. And then, in late February, Harry did it. In a duel against a wand-wielding Hermione, he managed to block one of her jinxes with a shimmering magical shield. It wasn't the strongest shield he'd ever cast, far from it, and it broke immediately after, but it was strong enough to block the jinx and surprising enough for Harry to take advantage of Hermione's shock and win the bout by telekinetically moving her wand out of her hands. "You don't need desperation," Harry explained to his friends once they were done celebrating his achievement, although the desperation of being beaten up by Hermione's spell repertoire certainly helped that first time. "It's just a matter of believing that you have something to defend against and that your magic can withstand what's being thrown at it." With that, Harry raised his hand, and a shimmering shield manifested in front of him, still flickering but not nearly as badly as the first one he'd made. That second wandless shield Harry made was only able to hold up to 3 stinging hexes, one of the weakest and most consistent offensive spells in their repertoire, before collapsing. The third one held up to 4, and the 10th one to over 20. Days passed and became weeks, weeks passed and became months, and slowly but surely, Harry and his time-traveling friends learned how to create a strong and adaptable wandless shield, one which could not only hold up as well as a wand cast Protgar but adapt under the caster's command to block spells that a wand user couldn't counter without a specialized shield spell or counter charm. From a wandless shield, it wasn't that hard to bridge the gap to casting a wandless stunning spell either, and from there to wandless jinxes, hexes, and curses of all varieties, inflicting anything on their targets that they could imagine. And all the while, Hermione continued to work on wandless transfiguration, finally achieving it and passing it on to her friends a month before the school year was to let out. By that point, they were easily able to take that basic skill and turn it into the ability to conjure birds with a snap of their fingers by the time they were on the Hogwarts Express. "You are true masters of wandless magic now," Lily Potter's shade told them, a proud smile on her face for her son and for every one of her talented students, "and you're ready to take on the world." Their third year was not entirely devoted to the study of wandless magic. For one, they decided to join the Hufflepuff Quidditch team, or at least Harry and Ron did. As Harry didn't particularly want to challenge Cedric Diggory for his position of Hufflepuff Seeker, he decided to try out for Chaser instead, a position he never would have gotten in Gryffindor, and ended up having the flying skills and coordination to make the team. Ron, meanwhile, tried out to be the team's keeper, a position which he secured by blocking an impressive 14 of 15 shots from the top Chaser hopefuls. Even Harry, who knew his best friend better than he knew himself, could only get a ball past him once out of 3 tries. Third year also meant the chance, again, to go to Hogsmeade. While the wizard village lacked the same novelty for Harry, Ron, Neville, and Hermione as it did for their classmates, it was still good to get out of the castle walls every now and then. And running in the Forbidden Forest in their animagus forms didn't count. Ron and Hermione, following up on the romantic tension and jealousy between them during the previous Loop's Yule Ball, decided to try spending a few Hogsmeade weekends together. Though Harry largely tried to stay out of his friends' love lives, he saw that they enjoyed their time together, but ultimately broke things off in late February. "We've spent so much time together," Ron confided in him a week or so after the breakup. "I trust her more than almost anyone, and I know her better than I know my own parents, my own brothers and sister at this point. But still, in the long run, we wouldn't work." "Why not?" Harry wondered. "When we break the loop," Ron said. "When this is all over, I'm going to rest on my laurels. I've learned a lot, I've worked hard, and I wouldn't give that up for anything. But I'm going to take all of this and get a steady job somewhere, making magical trunks, or something like that where my absurdly large magical core will be useful. Hermione, though, she's going to change the world, become Minister of Magic or the Headmistress of Hogwarts or something like that. That's not me. That can never be me. And you think that means the two of you can't be a couple? Harry asked. I thought opposites attract and all that. Not to mention, you're thinking long-term, post-loop, when we're still not 100% sure how to end the loop in the first place. Ron shook his head. It's not just that. Our personalities clash and always have. Without your influence and the troll, I wouldn't have ever seen her as more than an annoying know-it-all, let alone become friends with her. And without the time loop, I don't think we would have ever been able to develop a friendship in our own right, and not just being two friends of yours. As for having a fling with her for now, well, Hermione's pretty. Ron smiled with a goofy, infatuated grin, and she's going to get prettier. But I wouldn't have just a fling with her. I wouldn't do that. Hermione, when Harry managed to approach her and bring the subject up, was much of the same mind. It might have worked, she said. We might have been able to overcome our differences and make it work. But even now, 14, 15 years into being friends with him, half of the serious arguments in our little time travel clique are between the two of us. Sure, we could make it work. But Ron deserves better, and frankly, so do I. And that was that. The two of them were a little weird around each other for a few weeks, and then they were back to their usual selves, as if nothing had ever happened. On other matters of romance, Neville seemed to be developing an attraction for Hannah Abbott, one of the other Hufflepuffs in his year, but he was channeling his ultra-shy past self when it came to approaching her. Harry could see where he was coming from. Would Neville really want to start a relationship that was just going to be wiped out when the loop reset? A relationship where one of the parties couldn't ever be really honest with the other. Harry and Luna's relationship, too, was stifled, though for the simple reason that Luna was still 12 and then 13, and also not able to go to Hogsmeade. While they did go on occasional dates, in the Room of Requirement and other places, neither of them really possessed the physical maturity to do more. Still, Harry was looking forward to that changing in fourth year, especially since he wouldn't have to spend all his time preparing to win a magical tournament without the use of any magic. As they took the Hogwarts Express back to London to end their third year, they were not excited about the Quidditch Cup like last time, knowing full well how it would end, but about the far more exciting event they had planned for the coming holiday. The sun was shining brightly in the cloudless blue summer sky, and Britain was experiencing a warm and dry streak. In other words, the conditions were perfect for a group of 5 children to go on a day trip to the island of the Banes of Joy and Happiness, the home of the Dementors, Azkaban. Luna had argued her way into joining the mission. I'm just as good at wandless magic as the rest of you, she protested truthfully, and besides, inevitate to go on the fun missions. That was said with such an adorable pout that Harry and the others had no choice but to acquiesce. She did have a point. After all, most of their missions took place in the year before she arrived at Hogwarts, or involved ancient murder snakes that she lacked the magical power to defeat, being only magically in her early first year whenever they went to kill the basilisk. The fact that Luna's power and skill in magic couldn't grow like the rest of theirs really irked Harry sometimes. The mission to Azkaban should be, risks of having her soul removed aside, was a perfect chance for her to help out. She was the second most capable of all of them when it came to maintaining the happiness shield that was the wandless equivalent of the Patronus charm, with only Harry being better. And Harry would throw himself in front of a Dementor, which, according to his boggart, remained his greatest fear even after all of his experiences and triumphs, rather than see a hair on Luna's head frozen off by their chilly presence. The first step was simply to get onto the island of Azkaban, which was not an easy feat. Thankfully, Harry lived with a former resident of and expert on the place, whom he interrogated through extremely subtle questioning. "Hey, Padfoot," he greeted his godfather 2 days after Christmas. "We were learning about Azkaban in History of Magic, and I was wondering if you could answer a few questions about it." Sirius shuddered reflexively at the mention of the foul prison, but he nodded. "Good on you for even staying awake in history," he said. And well, my mind healer said I should talk about my traumatic experiences. So, ask away. Well, how do you even get on and off the island? He asked. I mean, I doubt that anyone can just apparate. Well, you're right. So unless you want to swim in the North Sea, you have to use a ministry-designated boat. Sirius's knowledge provided quite a bit of information, and what he didn't know, some further late-night research in the restricted section provided. This was rather fortuitous, seeing as their next best option was to use the resurrection stone to call Ekisdris, the dark wizard who had created Azkaban in the first place, and force him to answer questions about his cursed bastion. There were, according to their further research, 3 boats which the ministry had charmed to pass through the wards around Azkaban. At least one of them was kept on the island at all times in case of emergencies. The other 2 would regularly make the trip between Azkaban and an aura-guarded pier on the coast of Scotland. Having Darby regularly pop them over to check on said pier, and using their wandless magic to make themselves invisible, they had managed to determine the regular schedule for boat trips. Now they all turned themselves invisible, silenced themselves, decreased their weights, and covered themselves in a notice-me-not field so they could sneak onto a relatively empty boat to Azkaban, one which contained only 2 auras. In the unlikely event they were detected, they planned to overwhelm the auras with numbers before they could call for help. Thankfully, however, the boat trip passed silently but uneventfully, and the quintet carefully stepped off the cramped boat and onto the lifeless soil of Azkaban Island. While the protections keeping people in and out of Azkaban were incredibly strong, requiring such a complicated plan to bypass, security on the island itself was rather minimal. The island's human guards, aside from their role in keeping the prisoners minimally fed and checking on their status occasionally, stayed in a wing of the fortress that was warded against the Dementors and their influence. The Dementor guards were the ones responsible for keeping the prisoners contained. Good for the human guards' sanity, of course, and for the infiltrators' success as well. Once they were out of the sight of any guards, Neville dropped his silencing spell and spoke up. "We're clear," he informed them, as was his job. The light-haired boy had been designated their lookout and would be constantly maintaining a series of sense-enhancing and detection spells to ensure that they weren't caught. "Then let's go," Harry ordered. Though they could not see each other, the 5 witches and wizards got into a well-practiced formation with Harry in the lead and Luna in the back, both casting wandless anti-Dementor spells that took the form of a bubble of glowing white mist. Despite being similar to an incorporeal patronus in appearance, the protective bubble made by the 2 of them was as strong as even the best patronus. Harry led the group into the highest levels of the prison, where the Dementors were most concentrated and the worst of the worst prisoners were kept. All the while, Ron pushed out his magic to create a field of confusion that would prevent even the sanest of the prisoners from understanding that something was going on that shouldn't have been. Harry paused to sneer at the now empty cell where his godfather had been kept for a decade, the cell where Peter Pettigrew was now lying pitifully. He spared the betraying rat a single glance before moving on to their first target. Bellatrix Lestrange, Neville spat, was the worst of the worst, and Voldemort's most loyal supporter. When he fell, she led the group that went after my parents and tortured them to insanity. She professed her undying loyalty to him, even when faced with life in Azkaban, even when she could have bribed her way out with Themperios defense like the rest of her slimy friends. If any Death Eater might have been granted information about the Horcruxes, it would have been her. Hermione shimmered into visibility in front of Bellatrix Lestrange's cell, causing her to immediately respond. "Oh, who is this?" the Mad Witch said with a hysterical, insane giggle. "A little bitty girlie. Come for dear Bella, have you?" The unnerving laughter only disturbed the 5-time travelers, and not anyone else, courtesy of a silencing bubble being maintained by Ron. Mostly maintaining her composure, Hermione waved her hand to forcibly yank the sickly, stick-thin body of Lestrange off her dilapidated straw bed and to the bars of cell. Holding her in place with a minor exertion of her will, Hermione pulled out a bottle of Veritaserum and poured 3 drops into the Death Eater's forcibly opened mouth. Bellatrix Lestrange's eyes glassed over as the powerful truth potion took effect. "What is your name?" "Bellatrix Maya Lestrange," the Death Eater responded flatly. "How many sisters do you have?" "2," Bellatrix said, even though she seemed unhappy with the answer. "What is your allegiance?" "I am forever loyal to the great and powerful Dark Lord." Satisfied that the potion was working, Hermione moved on to their list of prepared questions. "Did the Dark Lord ever tell you details about how he achieved immortality? Did the Dark Lord ever give you a treasure that he said was extremely valuable?" "What was this treasure?" "A golden cup, one with badgers on it." Hermione smiled. That was likely Hufflepuff's cup, another of the legendary Founder's artifacts, which fit the pattern established by the locket and diadem. "Where did you put this treasure?" "I placed it in the Lestrange family vault in Gringotts." "Are you aware of any other things he valued similarly to that cup?" "Elaborate." "He gave Lucius Malfoy a book that he called a precious treasure." Hermione nodded in satisfaction. With a wave of her hand, the weakened witch was knocked out, and another wave erased her memory of the last day, just to be safe. It wasn't like the memory of one day was that different from another in Azkaban. Hermione moved on to the next cell, containing one Augustus Rookwood, but the Death Eater had no new information, nor did any of the others they interrogated. By the time they were done, everyone in the high security wing was unconscious with their memory of the day wiped. "Well," said Ron, the exhaustion of holding up the confusion spell for hours evident in his tone, "at least we got the location of one Horcrux." Harry led the way back down the levels of the prison and toward the pier, where there were 2 empty boats. Harry selected one to commandeer, and once he was sure all 5 of them were inside one, he launched it away from the dark island. "Let's never do that again," he said, as he finally faded into visibility. "Agreed," Neville said tiredly. "I can't believe Sirius lasted 10 years in that place semi-sane." "He's a good, strong doggy," said Luna. The waters of the North Sea were rough and choppy as they passed over them. When the pier on the mainland came into view, they quickly reapplied their invisibility spells, having Darby pop them off the boat 2 at a time until an empty boat arrived in front of a pair of very confused aura guards. "There is one thing, though," said Hermione. "What?" Ron asked. "We're going to have to rob Gringotts."